Good evening and welcome to the RTM budget meeting on Tuesday, April 9th. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So as we've done in past years, the last couple years, we're not expecting department heads to do a full presentation on your budget. The expectation is that we've followed the prior proceedings before the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. So if you want to update us on any changes since then, if you want to tell us about some of the major changes from your budget this year versus last year, or give us a thumbnail sketch, that's all fine. But largely this is for question and answer. So with that, we'll start with the first selectman.
Is this on? Can everybody hear this okay?
Yes.
All right. Again, thank you for the opportunity to present here. I'm going to present, this is the same presentation I gave to the Board of Selectmen and to the Board of Finance. I believe if you look, it's pretty much, the budget still is pretty much as I presented. I believe the Board of Finance made about $900,000 to $1 million worth of adjustments. I believe 700,000 of those adjustments were updates from the Board of Finance. I think 700 grand was removed from paving, 500 grand of that was put into contingency, 200,000 was removed from the budget, and a few other adjustments. So it's roughly the same with the exception of the paving number. You have this handout in front of you, but from the top, I certainly want to thank the department heads, CFO Bob Mayer, and our finance department. I want to thank Dr. Jones and the school administration, and I really want to thank all the volunteers, including yourselves, who contribute their time to make our town so special. The goal, as we have for the last few years, is to manage our expenses and still provide a high quality of services, fund all our essential services, fund our long-term obligations, including pension, OPEB or retiring medical, our surplus and our senior tax relief, to provide support and funding for our top quality school system, and to continue to strengthen our financial foundation. The town side budget recommendation is $1.36.1 million. 3.54% budget increase over the prior year, and this is a total dollar increase of $4.65 million. The major drivers there were one, salaries and expenses. And with this, we have all our contracts resolved except one. That one actually expires on June 30th, and we're in the process of negotiating that. Paving, and we restored a major portion of our paving budget or plan. Our supplemental contribution to surplus. This is what we put in to make sure that our surplus stays at a certain percentage of our operating budget. So as our operating budget goes up, we have to make an increasing contribution to our surplus. Our capital replacement, again, in the last couple of years, due to revenue reductions, we have also reduced our spending on capital expenditures, and we've tried to restore a number of those in this budget, and our debt service. On the positive side, we had some lower expense increases. One, our health insurance. You'll notice in the drivers, if you look at the larger budget book, was a smaller than expected increase, and that really shows our good experience. We are self-insured, so that if our experience is bad, we're going to pay more. If our experience is good, we're going to pay less. There's no way around that formula. That's what it is, and we had a good year, so we get to have a smaller increase than what you typically see in organizations for what's called the trend. On the pension side, we've had benefited from good investments by our pension board, so you'll see a smaller than normal increase there. And our workers' comp expense has really come down in the last 5 or 6 years. When I took office 8 years ago, this was one of the fastest growing expense areas we had. We instituted some better practices, including a safety committee that encompasses the town side as well as the Board of Ed side, because that was the Board of Ed side, surprisingly, was one of our big drivers for workers' comp, and we've seen the benefit of that. And our focus was not so much on saving money, that please look at that as a byproduct. Our message to the employees and the mantra of our safety committee is let's keep people from getting hurt. Let's keep people safe. That's what we're trying to do, and we're seeing the benefit of that financially as we've achieved that. On the Board of Ed recommendation side, the Board of Ed recommendation is $181.7 million. This represents a 4.59% increase in that. It reduces the superintendent's request by $700,000, and this is a total dollar increase of $7.97 million. There are certain Board of Ed expenses that are included in the town side budget, things like debt service, workers' comp, insurance, health being the nurses. The school nurses are really kept in the health department on the town side, police crossing guards, and school security officers. School security officers, that's the one place we have added staff on the town side in the last 10 years. Purchasing, unemployment insurance, finance, public works, and other. Total additional Board of Ed costs are $24.4 million. This brings the total Board of Ed expenses to $206.1 million. This is the number we report to the state every year. It represents 65% of our budget, or in other words, 65 cents out of every tax dollar goes towards education. This continues to make a strong statement about Fairfield's commitment to education, especially with a continued uncertainty in educational funding from the state. On the revenue side, we've got some ongoing issues, and I repeat these because it's part of my mantra to each of the department heads as we've gone through building this budget, that we lost tax revenue from the GE property to the tune of about $2 million, and we've lost municipal aid over the last few years in the state to the tune of about $4 million. That includes a reduction in educational cost-sharing funding from $3.5 down to $1 million, or $2.5 million that we used to receive to help with our educational costs. On the positive side, grand list growth of almost 1%. That's the largest in a decade. We've had some strong investment income. We saw an increase in pilot fees. And I'm going to suggest not so much an increase as a year ago we thought one of the state proposals had less. We put in less in the budget. We got a bit more, so this budget is consistent with last year's. It's not a growth over what we actually got last year. It's just reflecting in the budget was eventually passed by the state. And then we've got a tax sale, and we have use of some reserve accounts. Overall, what that means is the overall budget recommendation is $317 million. This is a total increase of $12.6 million over the prior year. At this level, the recommended mill rate would be 26.95, and this represents a 2.24 increase. And again, to achieve this in this environment with everything our town has gone through in the last few years is a real credit to what our department heads have been able to do in terms of how they manage their departments on the town side to both maintain services and mitigate any cost increase. But I think what the real telling story here is the 5-year average. The town expense budget increase over 5 years. The average increase on town expenses over 5 years has been just over 1%. On the Board of Ed side, this increase on the town side allowed us to average just over 3% on the Board of Ed side and still deliver a combined budget increase of 2.21% for the entire town. And this has allowed us to achieve a mill rate increase over 5 years of 2.01%. And just to be clear, that includes this year's numbers. This is the lowest 5-year average tax increase in the last 25 years. This 5-year accomplishment came in spite of the fact that Connecticut hasn't recovered from the worst recession since the Great Depression. And this has really limited our grand list growth. We've lost $7 million in state aid, as I mentioned, including our $2.5 million in educational cost sharing, a loss of $2 million in tax revenue because of the sale of the GE property to Sacred Heart, and the town has continued to invest in major capital projects like Riverfield, Ludlow High School, Holland Hill, and Sherman. In summary, this budget meets the challenges facing our town. It meets our long-term obligations for pension, OPEB, senior tax relief, and protects our AAA rating. It continues our support for high-quality education in our school system, and it recognizes the need to keep Fairfield affordable while maintaining valuable services for all. There's a number of other pages following this that show some history and trends and compare us to certain other municipalities in the state that I won't take time to go through here, but you're welcome to take a look at. Thank you for this time to introduce the budget.
Thank you. Any questions for the First Selectman on his summary budget presentation? Representative Iacono. You have to hold the button down for 3 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Tetro, for your presentation, and thank you for the extensive budget presentation you put forward. I just have a follow-up to the Board of Finance meeting that took place on the night that they voted. There was a big discussion surrounding the Board of Education budget, and two members were trying to reinstitute the $700,000 cut that you had made as a recommendation to the Board of Education budget. And what came out of that conversation was that no one understood your rationale behind it. I was wondering if you could just share with us your thought process in determining that factor.
Be happy to. Simply put, as we all know, the Board of Ed controls the detail in their expenses. The 4.9%, the 5% increase requested by the Board of Ed being the highest in a decade, being more than twice what the average has been. I cut that back to 4.6, which is still the highest in a decade and more than twice what the average increase has been over that time period. Simply put, 5% was too high. I wasn't sure I could, I was worried that it would have to be cut more than that. We're able to keep it at that. As the Board of Ed, or frankly, as the Board of Finance, certain members of that have made adjustments, or actually haven't made, have proposed adjustments to the Board of Ed over the years to the tune of $1 million or $2 million that they haven't always specified the details on. And certainly, we look to the Board of Ed to make those. It's two observations, though. One, it's kind of a $700,000 year. As you pointed out, the adjustment to the Board of Ed was $700,000. The increase in paving was $700,000, and somebody suggested maybe those are related. I would also point out that the Board of Finance was given $700,000 worth of cuts to the budget from our finance department. And if the pension transfer goes through, we'll have to come up with $700,000 worth of a cut of adjustments to pay for this state teacher's pension transfer. Why all those numbers come out at $700,000 this year, I don't know, but it is kind of a numerical coincidence in that regard. The other thing I'd point out is that at least at the Board of Selectmen level, and I suspect you all will have the chance to do that too, we look back at the Board of Ed budget. One of the things that happened in the Board of Ed budget in the current year was on the salary line. I believe it's page 25 in their book. There was approximately $1.2 million that they spent over and above what was budgeted this year. They added 11 heads over and above what was budgeted. We asked where that money came from, since that was their decision to add those in the year and what adjustments they made. They gave us an analysis, a schedule of the givebacks, as they call them, that total about $1.4 million. They were able to do that without impacting students or hurting classrooms. So obviously none of those are easy adjustments to make, but this is about half that level on a higher budget number. So the thought was, as we reviewed that, and as the Board of Selectmen reviewed that, and still didn't make any adjustments to this, we thought that there would be some flexibility in their being able to find that.
Further questions for the First Selectman? Representative Garskoff?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Tetro, you mentioned the pilot payments from the state. I'm not sure that I know this for sure, but I believe I do. But with the sale of the GE property to Sacred Heart, did we ever see an increase in pilot contribution from the state because of that?
No.
Thank you.
Are there questions for the first selectman? Representative Tallman.
Hi, Mr. Tetro, Peter Tallman, District 8. As a follow-up to that, there's been a lot of frustration lately, it seems, with the lack of help we're getting from our two wonderful universities, especially in light of our education costs increasing and more education dollars being taken away. I do know Quinnipiac gave, I think it was Hamden or North Haven, $750,000 last year before everything got worse. Have they had any contact with you? I know $100,000 was given us from Sacred Heart for the Stratfield project, but in terms of education, it was also kind of interesting that they came out just recently with saying how many billions of dollars they give to the town and the area. But that's not direct from them. That's, the students, the professors, et cetera. But I think everybody's kind of waiting for them to step up and maybe help us out a little bit.
Yeah, I've had discussions with both universities, and in terms of, for lack of a better term, a direct payment or check, there's been less than an enthusiastic response. Still working with Fairfield U on perhaps how we can creatively look at some things, but I would point out that when we look at Sacred Heart, I'm very pleased with terms of how that, I'm going to call it a partnership, is developing with the town. One, they're looking at adding an ice rink up there, which they would make available to town residents at a cost, certainly. And same thing with a swimming pool. Both are currently in the plans for going on the West Campus, as they call it, just to be specific, the old GE campus. And both would be a cost, but we wouldn't have to build them, we wouldn't have to manage them, and we wouldn't have to maintain them, and I think that would be a great opportunity to add those to our amenities. Second, we are working with Sacred Heart to move our 911 call center from the basement in a flood zone up to, again, forgive me, the old GE campus and their technology center, so that's kind of plug and play ready. Few adjustments we have to make. And that's one of the, we're also looking at combining at the same time with Westport to kind of regionalize and make, improve our quality of service and long term improve some of our costs. There will be some cost savings in the short term, but that's more of a, from our standpoint, a service level improvement and strategically, literally, to get it out of the flood zone so it's not a problem there. In addition, we have a sewer line expansion up there, both because of the growth we're seeing and partly because of the growth that Sacred Heart is seeing. We have to expand or upgrade our pumping station to the tune of $2 million. Sacred Heart is committed to pay $1 million worth of that upgrade. In addition to that, they've just added a real educational opportunity for their students with this whole focus on entrepreneurship and getting students involved in starting businesses and that type of thing. They've joined with Verizon and a company called Alley to create a business incubator. I'm looking at that and saying, that here we are trying to grow our grand list, and here is the university adding something that may help their students, help us add companies, add jobs, and as these companies start out, certainly they'll start to fill in some of our commercial lease and rental options. So I think that we're making progress. I'd love to see a check from either one or both. I've made that proposal. I'd be kind if I said they were thinking about it. However, we're going to keep talking to them about it.
Thank you.
Further questions, Representative Durrell?
3 seconds, Alex.
Great. Can you hear me now? Yes, okay. Can you talk about the tax sale numbers and all that, please? I mean, how much is...
We put an estimated tax sale in for about $2 million. If
how
we
much
need
is-
to do that, we're going to work hard at looking as we go through the year, see if there's any way to get that, but we have the ability to go back and get the tax sale. That, in essence, it's going after delinquent taxes that we have. Mr. Mayor can probably talk to you in more detail about the full range of numbers and what our capability is there, but we have that in the budget for this year if we need to do it.
The Fairfield 5, can you talk about it? Have we made any dividends off of it? I know we got a company from Stamford, which is one of the members of the Fairfield 5, but I haven't heard much else.
Yeah, it's not something that's going to pay off dividends quite that quick, but it is something that we very definitely need to do. For those of you that aren't familiar, the Fairfield 5 is a joint effort by Greenwich, Stamford, Norwalk, Westport, and Fairfield. We're working together, started about a year and a half ago, to jointly promote Fairfield County. One of the things, if you're watching TV, what you're going to see is you're going to see advertisements for Westchester County, for New Jersey, but you're not going to see anything for Fairfield County. Very simply, Fairfield County doesn't have any government. That's actually good, so we don't lose any tax dollars on that. But we are joining together to say somebody's got to promote Fairfield County. Fairfield County has 25% of the jobs for the state, 30% of the employers, 40% of the income tax for our entire state comes from Fairfield County. We need to promote that. Fairfield County is the one county in the state that's been growing. For all this talk of Connecticut losing people, we're growing. So is Fairfield, by the way, for the last 5 years. But on top of that, we have a net positive inflow from Westchester and New York City. When you look at what's taking place, Fairfield County has a lower tax base, a lower cost of living, and a higher quality of life. If you're going to locate in the tri-state area, you want to do it in Fairfield County. So we've gone down to New York City twice and made presentations. We're continuing to do that. We actually, there's a bill up at the state capitol that might help us provide some funding for that. But whether the state provides any additional, and it would be matching funds on that level, but whether they provide any money or not, we're going to continue to work together to do this. We've also gotten together with Deloitte, looked at both this economic development venture, but also then looked at all 5 towns and said, are there other ways we can join together and work together? So there's opportunities over time that we might come up with a common building permit system, some other opportunities that we can work together just to make it easier for companies to move here. The premise overall is that a rising tide will raise all boats. We're not in competition with Stamford, though it was nice for that company to move up here. Thank you for pointing that out. We're not in competition with Westport, even though Save the Children has moved from Westport to here a few years ago, and that was nice. But if companies move out here and their employees move out, it's going to be win-win for all of us. Heck, if they move to Ridgefield, if they move to Trumbull, that's going to help us all out. And we're looking at this really as a beta test. It's not like the Fairfield 5 is the end-all and be-all, and that's all we're going to do. But we needed to start somewhere. And getting 5 towns to work together is a challenge. Getting 5 first selectmen or mayors in one room is a challenge. When we first did our first presentation on New York, we're like, can we get all 5 of us in one room in New York on the same day? And then we had to figure out who was going to talk. But we were able to do that. So it's a start, but it's one step in a longer journey. But I think we've got to, if we don't start now, we'll never catch up, and we've got to make sure somebody is promoting Fairfield County. We have an awful lot to sell. There's a real positive story about what's taking place out here, and the opportunities for business. When you look at the range of business opportunities, when you look at the range of lifestyles that we have out here in Fairfield County, that's unmatched almost anywhere else in the country. This is a real positive story. We're doing all this in spite of what's taking place at the state level. So if the state level manages to turn around, we're going to be ready for it, and we're going to be a launching pad for that. Fairfield County, in a real sense, is the engine that drives the state. We want to make sure everybody knows that.
Further questions, Representative Georgiadis?
Drew Georgiadis, District 9. Thank you for your hard work on the budget. I was looking through the books, extensive. What I'd like for you to address is we've all been getting a lot of emails from constituents, and it's fantastic to see the level of interest and the data, but some of the information is incorrect. You talk about the growth of the grand list, 0.9%, biggest in a decade. Can you please address that and maybe compare us to our, surrounding towns if you think that's appropriate, because there is a lot of misinformation out there.
Yeah, I think when you take a look at the grand list growth, we've managed to, we would have seen some growth in past years. except we also had to absorb the loss of the GE property, which we talked about that being $2 million in tax revenue, but it's a much bigger loss in terms of numbers coming off the grand list. When you look at the number of building projects going along, and I think Mark Barnhart can probably be more specific in terms of the number of projects taking place, to get we've got an $11 billion grand list. That's the total value of the assessed property in town. To grow that at 1% is over $100 million of development in 1 year. All right. When you look at that, certainly as a mature town, it's harder to get that growth. So that's a bigger deal. And we also want to make sure that's targeted and whereas I'm going to suggest that in the southeastern portion of town, around the Metro Center train station, there's plenty of room for growth in there. When you look at what we could be doing in that area, I'm going to suggest that we've got a number of car dealerships down there. Now, our car dealerships are good corporate citizens. I don't mean to say anything about that, but from a pure tax revenue standpoint per square foot down there, a one-story building on a parking lot doesn't generate the maximum amount of tax dollars. We've got to look at that. It was great to see economic development and planning and zoning come together just about a month ago and talk about what growth could take place and should we have higher building adjustments there than we do, allowances rather, there than we do in other parts of town. All right? We all like our downtown Fairfield, downtown Southport. That's part of our character. That's part of our charm. We don't want to impact the historic district. But if we're going to manage tax growth, and you take a look, and I went through this a year ago, but let me briefly go through the comparison between Westport and Fairfield in the last 20 years. 20 years ago, we had a grand list of about $4 billion. Westport had a grand list total of about $3 billion. In that time period, our mill rate has gone from 25 to 26. Westport's has gone from 23 and change to like 16 and change. So I looked at that and said, okay, what are we spending money on that they're not? In fact, if you look at the budgets, their budget increase has been much higher than ours on a percentage basis. Obviously, they're a smaller town. What's made the difference is their grand list growth. We went from $4 billion to $11 billion. They went from $3 billion to $11 billion for half as many people. So they have literally almost twice as much grand list dollars to tax per person as we do. So that's the dynamic, and that's what we're trying to address. And we're very much built out on the residential side, and certainly if we add residential buildings, that impacts schools and becomes higher cost development. If you look at our commercial side, roughly 4.5% of our land area is zoned commercial, but it generates 10% of our tax dollars. So it's very productive. So if we can look at taking that percent zone, if we can take that to 5% or 5.5% on one hand, so we expand that a bit, if we can then turn around and take some of that commercial land area, increase the height that's allowable there, and we make that more valuable, that is the most direct way to add value to our grand list without dramatically changing the rules and without impacting our neighborhoods or historic areas.
Mike, I went to one of Mark Barnhart's meetings, and he was talking about mixed-use buildings. Do you envision the two-story buildings as commercial on both stories, or mixed use with affordable housing on the second or third floor?
I think if you look at all the recent developments, it's mixed use seems to be what's driving. I'm not trying to change the market. The developers have done very well in Fairfield and have guided us very well along those lines. But if you look at the Trademark building, if you look at the most recent developments, they're either, I think they're virtually all mixed use. And looking at that, I think that we've got the one on the old Knights of Columbus property by Tomlinson and Mosswood. I think that's
Residential.
completely residential going in there. But other than that, I think that most of the buildings, developments in the commercial area have been mixed use.
Thank you.
Further questions? I forgot your name, I'm sorry. Representative Fogel. It's the second time I did it, I'm sorry, Dave.
David Fogel, District 1. Thank you for that presentation. I have a couple high-level questions, if you don't mind. First question deals with the budget process in terms of your communication with the department heads. I'm just curious what generally you communicate to them. First of all, each department head comes up with his or her own budget, correct, for their department?
They come up with an initial proposal, yes.
Okay. And what do you communicate to them in advance? In other words, do you say to them, start with last year's numbers and, you know, try to have minimal increases? Or do you say, start with last year's numbers and try to cut where you can? Or do you say, don't even bother with last year's numbers, let's start fresh with what services are absolutely necessary and the costs to implement those services, or some other communication?
Yeah, thank you. I think, first of all, this has really been for, with most of the department heads who've been here for a number of years, this is an ongoing discussion. It's not like 1 year out of the box and, you know, without any regard to prior years. We've had ongoing discussions both from budget season to budget season and throughout the year. One of the challenges and one of the differences in the public sector as opposed to the private sector, and I spent 30, 35 years on the private sector running either divisions or smaller companies before getting into this job, is we're much more like a regulated industry. There are certain things we have to provide. We have to provide public education. That's 65% of our budget. That's the biggest driver on that. When you look at the town side, we have to provide police service, fire service, public works, and we have to provide that 724. We can't go back and take a look at, hey, what if we provide fire department service Monday through Friday? You know, if you call on Friday, please call back first thing Monday morning and we'll take care of your fire. So it's a much different environment from that stand in terms of what we have to take place. So very definitely, since we're pretty much providing the same services, if there were functions or services we didn't have to provide, we would have cut them out a few years back as we needed to, but certainly always willing to revisit that if there are services that any member of this body or any resident feels we don't need. We'd be happy to go back and take a look at that, because at this point, we have fewer employees on board than we did 10 years ago, and that includes after we added the school security group. All right, so we are doing more with less in a macro sense. We do have to provide those services and those charts. We have functions that we have to provide. So no, it's not a question of going back and saying, let's start with a clean slate and imagine we're going to start our police department all over again and decide what we have to do. We have to provide those policing services. Given that, I think if you take a look at, and that's why if you take a look at the driver's page in the budget book, that's probably the simplest macro look at what drives it. You can see, obviously, salary and wages is part of that, health insurance is part of that, pensions part of that, OPEB is part of that. After that, you get into things that we really have discretion over, and that's really where, including, when you look at including union contracts, health insurance, pension, everything else, we've averaged 1% a year increase over the last 5 years. I don't believe there's a town in the state that's done better.
Okay, well, just to follow up on the whole discretionary, because that was going to be my next question, is discretionary versus non-discretionary. So, again, high level, when you're coming up with the budget, we obviously have revenues, you have expenses, and then either a shortfall or a surplus. On the revenue side, generally speaking, you're able to estimate the numbers, which you've done in the budget. On the expense side, I realize the way it's set out in all the materials is education versus town, but is it fair to say another way to think about it is, as you just said, mandatory increases versus discretionary expenses? And so knowing or being able to estimate what the mandatory increases are, if you aggregate those, assuming revenue is kept constant, would another approach be to say, okay, whatever that aggregate increase, mandatory increase is, why don't we go back to each department or the entire budget and look for ways to make up through cuts or other rationalizations, whatever they might be, to offset the increase, the mandatory increase, to try to come to a zero increase in the budget. Is that a reasonable approach or not?
I think that is similar to the process we've used, especially over the last 2 years. We've really stress tested the budget. All right, this year, if you look at it, break it out again in macro numbers, we've got about $300 million in tax revenue, 320 in overall budget, but 300 million in tax revenue. All right, we lost $6 million in the last few years. So we had to go back and in essence, in order to achieve that 1% or 2% tax increase, we had to come up with, replace 2%, otherwise the tax increase that we had would have been 2% higher. So in essence, we did that. So we looked every place we could. We did make adjustments on pretty much everything. We adjusted on the capital costs we could. Short of that, roughly 70% of the town side costs are labor. We'd have to go back, and if you look at it department by department, we have to have police, we have to have fire. We could go back, I think, and I don't know if we're required to have conservation. There may be some rules that have that. I don't think we're required to have Parks and Rec. I don't think we're required to have a library. Those are all valuable services and valuable departments and have a lot of strong support from our residents. So I don't mean to suggest to you that we looked at cutting those departments entirely, but when you look at what flexibility you have, it's not the same as in the private sector where you can sit here and say, okay, we can't afford to operate that branch anymore. We'll figure out another way to do that. We don't have to have Saturday hours anymore. We'll figure out another way to do that. We don't have to work overtime in these areas. We'll figure out another way to do that. It's much more of a regulated industry in terms of services that we have to provide and hours that we have to provide them.
Thank you.
Further questions for the first selectman? Representative Gerber?
You have to hold it for 3 seconds.
Thank you, First Selectman Tetreault. Also, the increase in the grand list is really encouraging, and also the amount of economic development that's going on in the town is very encouraging. So really looking forward to hearing from Mr. Barnhart as well, but it's really nice to see. I think it seems to be picking up. I just have hopefully a simple question. If you can't answer it right now, I'll just ask through email. But the decrease in full-time employees for the town from over the last 10 years, even though population's gone up 3,500 approximately, we've gone from 474 to 457.6. Is there a theme there? Is that sort of outsourcing, or is it productivity, or is it doing less?
I think one of the challenges is, as you point out, with the population going up, we literally are providing more services by definition. I think I'd have to go back and look. Those are the numbers I got from the finance department. I'll have to go back and look at just where those reductions were. But it's from a pure services standpoint, if everything was constant, it would be bigger than that. We've added headcount in our school security group in terms of adding police officers. So we've got 3 or 4 more bodies, I believe, at least, on the police side of things. We also, in this budget, restored one position. A position that had been cut before I was first selectman from conservation. A few years ago, we filled it in with a part-time position, but we've had trouble keeping a part-time person in place. They keep leaving for full-time jobs. So in order to keep up with our conservation work, we've added that position back in. But we haven't really generated any new programs in that sense. We've been restoring those. But for a specific breakout of where those reductions were made, I think a few were made in Public Works, but a more detailed response to that, I'm going to have to do some homework.
Yeah, thank you. It stands out as surprising. I would assume some of it's maybe trend towards outsourcing in Public Works.
We're definitely doing more outsourcing, and again, you can talk to Joe Michelangelo in Public Works, and he's here, but we're doing more contracting out in that regard than we have done before.
Further questions? Representative Iacono.
Pam Iacono, District 8. Since you asked regarding synergies, I'll just put this out there, and it's only something I learned about today. I don't know much about it. Maybe you could look to having more synergies and delineating things and responsibilities in terms of the DPW and Parks and Rec. For example, I just found out today that if you are renewing your kayak and you're down at Jennings, you're dealing with DPW. But if you're getting a beach sticker, you're dealing with Parks and Rec. I don't know anything about the back room deals on, or not deals, the back room operations of that, but maybe that's something that you could look into as improving an efficiency. You know, should you be calling the DPW department with your credit card number to renew your kayak rack when maybe they could get on a system with Parks and Rec to renew their kayak there?
No, thank you. We've looked at...
I don't have a kayak. This is what I was told today. And by the way, I could be completely wrong. If someone else has a kayak and knows differently, let me know. But
Yeah, right
since
off-
you mentioned an idea, that one came through today.
No, I appreciate it. I don't think you're completely wrong. Let's start with that. And I'm not quite sure when it started, but our marina manager, who kind of operates the marina, which is on one part under the umbrella of Parks and Rec, has worked in kind of out of our Public Works office in Sullivan Independent Hall. So it's one person as opposed to something else. And in the off season, when it's not marina season, is working directly for Parks and Rec in that. In the summer season or boating season, a couple years ago, we adjusted those hours so that the marina manager would work weekends, which makes sense. That's when boaters are here. So we had to adjust the work week so that person works Saturday and Sunday as part of their normal work week and has 2 days off during the week. So it's not an overtime situation. But I think we'll go back and certainly take a look at that. So thank you for that.
Representative Bastilli? No? Further questions? Representative Gerber?
First Selectman, just a quick question that Representative Iacono was talking about synergies, and it kind of popped in my head. And would you like to see more synergies on sort of the maintenance side between the Board of Ed and the town? Is that like?
I think that the question was, would you like to see more synergies for maintenance opportunities between the Board of Ed and the town? I think yes. I think that we've had some discussions along those lines. Board of Ed contracts out a lot of their lawn maintenance work and stuff, so I'm not going to suggest that if we took that over, we'd contract it out too, because we contract out a lot of our lawn maintenance work. In terms of facilities maintenance, that's been kind of an ongoing discussion. Certainly, with the amount of buildings the Board of Ed has, they like to be in control of that. I think that there's been a lot of talk recently of consolidating services and a lot of talk within towns. Do you do it between town and Board of Ed? I think there's a lot more opportunity for towns to consolidate, I'm going to call them town services, for lack of a better term, with other town governments. I think then education is, as much as education has an IT department and the town has an IT department, the Board of Ed IT is pretty focused on what school curriculum and educational support. The town covers a host of other bases. However, if we were to look at IT with another town, they perform all the same town services we do. I don't think we each need our own town IT center in each town, especially with a lot of the smaller towns. To me, there's certainly a capacity to have a central IT center with help desks out at each town, so you have, in essence, more user support. But then you could have, a consolidated group of system engineers, that type of thing, at a central facility, and it would mean towns getting together and agreeing on what software they're going to use and what reporting they're going to use, that type of thing. But I think in the long term, I think there's greater cost savings there and a greater synergy than there is in trying to find that synergy between the town and Board of Ed just because it has the same title on the department. The functions very often are very different.
Further questions? Representative Durrell?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Last week's Connecticut Post article after the Board of Finance made their decisions, the article mentioned that the mill rate would be 1.9. What are we voting on, or what are we doing?
I didn't see that article. I suspect what they said is instead of a 2.24% increase, the increase would be 1.9%. The Board of Finance made, I think, between a $900 and $1 million adjustment. Ms. Gardner with Finance can tell you exactly what that is. $700,000 of that cut were cuts that the Finance Department suggested they made. They're kind of what I'll call administrative cuts. 200 grand was in paving, a few other dollars in something else. If you look at that, at $300 million in tax revenue, 1% of that is $3 million. $1 million is about a third of a percent. A 0.3% gets you from 2.24 to 1.9. So I think it was 1.9%. The article said a mill rate of 1.9. I would hope they're right, but I think they were mistaken.
And, okay, yeah, because last year on the budget, we voted, what, 2.43, and I think it was a 2.09 increase, mill increase, after...
You're kind of the last vote, so what you vote on pretty much stays.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to track that in terms of what you voted on versus what it was, I think Finance can probably step you through that.
Right, because there were some adjustments and all of that.
Well, there aren't, after you guys vote, there aren't any more adjustments.
But last year, we got some extra money, if I remember right, at the last moment with the budget from the state, didn't we?
It doesn't, once you guys vote, that's our budget, and we did get some extra money. Board of Finance can potentially take that into account when they set the mill rate.
Right. Okay, so the Board of Finance is the one that makes the final decision.
That's why they meet the Thursday after you set the
Right.
budget.
Okay, because it was about 1/7 less what we voted on
Yeah,
last year.
it's very seldom that there's any significant change after you vote.
So this year, we shouldn't expect it.
We can hope for it, but I would not count on it. I doubt if that'll be the case.
Further questions? Okay, seeing none, you're also next up on the First Selectman's office, so I don't know if there are questions on that, if there's anything you want to share with us about your department. It's on page 43 of the budget book. Any questions for the First Selectman on his office? Representative Lopez?
Hi, Erin Lopez, District 2. At the Board of Finance hearings, there is some discussion about Board of Selectmen's salaries, about getting together after the budget process this year. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, what we did 4 years ago and what the Board of Selectmen has suggested we do again is reach out to the moderator of the RTM, ask for one Democratic representative, one Republican representative, and reach out to the chair of the Board of Finance and ask for one Democratic representative, one Republican representative. And that four-person subcommittee, if you will, recommend to the Board of Selectmen what the raises ought to be for the Selectmen. Two things. One, we're doing that because the charter says the Board of Selectmen need to vote on all town officials' salaries, the Board of Selectmen obviously being town officials. The salaries that we're voting on do not take effect until after Election Day. So think December 1st. All right, so it won't impact any of the people voting on it this year, but the approach we used 4 years ago was to basically take the recommendation from a group made up of those members. That seemed to work well. It's a relative, given for the current year, we're voting on what amounts to a little more than 6 months worth of salary for one full-time person and two part-time people. It's not a large amount of money, so we have gone to adjusting that in the, from contingency into that, into those salary lines. And it's also that you'll be recommending that pretty much after you know where the budget is. So over the next couple months, but you kind of know where the budget is at this point. So you're doing that from a fully informed standpoint. You also have access to what all the union contracts are we've said in the last couple of years, so you have some guideline in terms of what might be appropriate there.
Further questions? Representative Iacono?
Thanks. I just have a follow-up on that since it was raised. Mr. Tetra, I sent a question back to you on that. And thank you for asking for representation from our caucuses. It's much appreciated. I thought it would be helpful. I don't know if you were given any thought to the charge behind that. Did you vote on one at the Board of Selectmen? I didn't see a response back from you.
Yeah, thank you. I did get your email. I got it late last week, and as soon as I get to spend a little bit, I was in and out of the office today. As soon as I get a little more in, I'll give you a more complete answer. Didn't expect it to come up here, but since it did, I'll verbalize it here and try and get that back to you in writing. The charge was simply what I said. I think we'll go back and look at what we did 4 years ago. My question to my two colleagues is, was this a reasonable approach? We did it 4 years ago. Mr. Bateson was involved in that, I believe, 4 years ago, so it made sense to him at that point. Mr. Timniak, I don't think was directly involved, but was certainly around at that time to see what took place there. But I'll go back and look at what the guidance we gave. I think we had that same question 4 years ago, and we'll get that out as part of that.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Durrell.
Yeah, I know. Last question. 4 years ago in the Connecticut Post, it said your salary was $131,425, and now it's, with your proposal, it's $145,072. That's 2.5 every year. Is that correct? I mean, it comes out coincidentally 2.5% every year from 15 to 19.
Yeah, I believe that's what was recommended. I believe I did not, one of those years, I didn't take an increase at all. So it shouldn't add up to that for every year. But that's, what was recommended was 2.5 a year at that time. There was 1 year where the department heads, I asked the department heads not to get a raise, and I did the comparable thing and didn't give an increase to myself either that year.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Tetro. Next, we have the Conservation Department.
Brian, I'll leave the mic on for you.
Hi, Brian. So again, you should assume that we've watched the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen hearings. If there's an update you want to give us on your budget, if there's something you want to tell us about the year-over-year change, or if you want to just give us a thumbnail sketch, that's fine. Otherwise, we'll just open up to questions.
Yeah, just the increases in my budget. If you go down and look at it, you've watched the finance.
Can you give page numbers?
Sorry, page 69 and 70, and then the salary schedules on 71. So the increase in the budget is, we've tried to manage it as much to 0 or 1% over the past couple years. This year, actually, it's up 10%, but that's because we replaced a position that we actually eliminated 2 years ago. So when we were putting the budget together, I have asked for that position back in subsequent years, but because of the state of the budget in the previous years, it was cut. So we've made do with that, but I did request it again this year, and the First Selectman felt that it was okay to replace it at this point in time. So that's basically what's driving the percentage increase. Other than that, if you go through, there's a bunch of reductions and some minor increases in just the seasonal payroll. But other than that, I can take any questions for anyone.
Any questions? Representative Georgiadis.
Drew Georgiadis, District 9. What Mr. Tetro said was that you increased a part-time employee to full-time?
No, so there was I do have a part-time
I
employee.
see the part-time on the payroll.
Yes, so she is part-time. That position has been, we've had that position for 3 years. There's no intention to make that a full-time position. The position that we're replacing was actually in the field staff. There was a retirement 3 years ago in November, and at that point, when we were putting together the budget, I decided to eliminate that position at that point for that particular budget year, especially going into the winter. So we didn't replace that and that's the position we're actually looking to replace, but at a lower pay grade as well.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Representative Iacono?
Thank you, Pam Iacono, District 8. My question is surrounding the ongoing debate that the Conservation Commission's having regarding on-leash, off-leash, specifically around open space, mostly around Lake Mohegan. When do you anticipate the commission would have a decision on what, if anything, they want to do there? And will there be a budgetary impact to it? In other words, in terms of enforcement or that type of thing?
So there was a committee set up, this is lively debate in town, there was a committee set up last October. It met, last March. We actually met for over a year as a subcommittee. They produced a report to the full commission. It's on the web, it's available. You can see the options that were discussed. The committee's recommendation was to possibly put in a permit type of off-leash requirement just to manage the numbers of people. One thing we do lack with a lot of the open space areas, because they're open to not only town residents but out-of-town residents, just how much usage those areas do receive. It's not like we could put a turnstile at the entrance to all the open space areas and kind of estimate. So one of the things they thought was if you implemented kind of a permit type system, we would actually be able to gauge how many people are using the properties, which is data we lack. So the full report was presented to the commission in March. I don't know when. It's up to the chairman and the commission when they want to address that. We are extremely busy on the inland wetland side of things right now, where we're going to be having multiple public hearings because of a lot of the developments that are going on. So I don't have a time frame of exactly when that would be implemented. It would require a public hearing process, obviously. You know, anyone who's been paying attention to the discussion, it's very emotional on both sides of the debate.
Passionate.
Passionate.
I don't have a dog, by the way.
So we've had those subcommittee, during that subcommittee, you know, a normal subcommittee will generally meet 3 or 4 times. We ended actually meeting about 7 or 8 times each night. We basically had public comment session where people could get up there and offer their ideas or comments.
I was more, thank you for that explanation, it's much appreciated. But you don't anticipating needing any funds or anything out of your department to take care of that?
So the idea...
Or is that a police department thing?
So the idea was to put together a framework. Once we had the recommendation, put together kind of an idea of a framework. The idea would be that it would be budget neutral as far as staffing requirements, but it would actually, I wouldn't implement a program in town now, knowing the budget the way it is, where it wouldn't be pay for itself or ongoing payments. So there would be no impact to the budget from a personnel point of view. We would actually look to raise revenue, and then, you know, those are some of the things that we need to work out. If the Conservation Commission decides they want to accept that recommendation and move forward with it. Right now, I think, you know, it's kind of on hold at the moment, but.
Representative Georgiadis?
Drew Georgiadis, District 9. Thank you for coming.
Yep.
And thank you for all your work. I enjoy conservation property at the end of my street. To follow up on Representative Iacono's comment and the budgetary impact on a department like conservation, this whole situation with off-leash, on-leash, what's your opinion on conservation as the appropriate department to handle this versus a park and rec? I personally am not convinced that conservation, that their mission is to monitor recreation by people with dogs or without dogs or with children playing. It seems more of a park and rec kind of thing, and they have, you know, a big budget, they have revenue, they, because I don't know. it
So
just
the
seems
reason
that-
why this falls under the Conservation Department's charge is because it's deemed open space land. So parks are managed by the Parks and Rec Department, beaches, things like that. They're maintained by the Public Works Department. Conservation's a bit unique. We actually not only oversee the open space areas, we actually maintain them. So by charter, it would be our responsibility. Town charter requires us to set the rules and regulations for all the open space properties and maintain them. So rather than, you know, Parks and Recs, there's a division of service, there's a separation of services between maintenance and rules and regulations. Parks and Rec Commission sets the rules and regulations for parks and fields and ball fields and all that, and Public Works maintains them. We're basically a one-stop shop when it comes to open space properties in the town.
Thank you, because I, having been the conservation chair of my garden club for many, well, 3 terms, it seems that many of the people on the commission, that the mission of a conservation department, you know, dogs and children trampling on everything, I understand the open space concept, but I just, from a budgetary standpoint and the revenue standpoint, I just thought I would bring it up.
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, we again rely on the police department to go enforce the rules on open space property. So there is, you know, there is kind of a division of enforcement versus maintenance and rule setting. But, you know, that's on all sides of the town, really.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Representative Pistilli?
Sharon Pistilli, District 3. I had a question. Lucky for you, I work in compensation, so I can eyeball 2 columns of numbers and just have things pop into my head. On the conservation crew chief, the year over year is a 13% increase, but I also noticed that the contract year is 14 to 20. So it says at the bottom, the number in parentheses reflects the salary contract year.
On page 71?
71, I'm sorry. Yeah, it seemed odd to me that it's 6 years between contracts and the plus 13% seemed a little out of step with the other increases that are on that page, like the other, you know, the other roles.
I don't have the salary increases in the contract in front of me. I mean, I can check that for you.
But, and was the last contract from 2014 then? So there was 6 years between contracts?
I believe the last Public Works contract, yes.
Okay.
This was 2014.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, so I have 3 unions that I manage in my department. All the contracts have been settled, and they're all seeing salary increases over the past couple of years. So that's been a driver in our budget.
Further questions? Representative Fogel?
Thank you very much. So just to go back to your opening, so I make sure I understand, you said you have roughly a 10% increase in your budget for this year, and the primary driver for that is the one
That's
replacement hire from a few years ago that you had eliminated, right?
That's correct.
So I guess my question is, if I were your boss, which I'm obviously not, but I came to you and I said, look, we have a state economic crisis and we have a very tenuous economic situation in our town, and I'm trying to avoid any tax increase this year. And therefore, I'm asking you as a department head to keep your budget static, same as last year, no increase, absent some extraordinary need, which everyone understands, occasionally that happens. Would you still recommend the hiring of this person?
I've gone, so that scenario you're talking about right now has been the position that we've taken the past 2 years. When I put my budget together, I'm always going to ask for that position back because I think I need that to do the job the best I can for the citizenry. When we eliminated it there, I did that out of necessity to keep the budget low. There's things that are going on in the department that I have people that are more nearing retirement age. And there's a lot of institutional knowledge with a lot of the things that we do in the town that need to be taught now before I lose those people out the door. There's complex tidal flood protection that are unique to Fairfield. And there's not a lot of people who are out there who can come in and, I couldn't hire someone from Norwalk or whatever to come in and run that equipment. They just don't know. So I need to train people before the other people go out the door. Could I put that off a couple more years? Things suffer. I only have 2 full-time guys in the field. Someone calls in sick. Basically, I'm telling the other guy to go pick up trash for most of the day. Can't tell him to cut trees with one guy. So there's definitely a loss of productivity with that.
Okay, thank you.
And again, this is a laborer position I'm trying to replace. So it's not, it's not a high, it's someone who I'm trying to get at the lowest level of the union contract that we can teach and kind of bring them up through the
And I
ranks.
appreciate that, and I'm not trying to
No, I
pick on
understand.
you at all. I'm making a larger point. And I do appreciate you said you're hiring at a lower rate than the person he
That we lost,
or
that
she is
we lost,
replacing.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions?
Phil?
Representative Georgiadis?
Drew Georgiadis, District 9. Through you, Mr. Moderator, to the First Selectman, can you address the follow-up of Mr. Fogel's comment about when people retire, how they're replaced and rotating through different departments? Is he here? Or it's my understanding that you take the aggregate of all the people that were not replaced and you replace them. You have a plan to replace them?
Yeah, I believe what you're referring to is a little bit different than what was done here. As Brian mentioned, this is a position that he eliminated and kept open as long as he could until he started to see a degradation in the quality of the open space and work, and as you talked about in terms of balancing workloads and doing some planning for the retirements coming up. What you're referring to is what we've done the last 2 years in terms of helping balance the budget because the state has been so unreliable in terms of the consistency of funding, and for 2 or 3 years in a row we saw mid-year cuts, which is most devastating because once we approve the Board of Ed dollars, those are fixed where that is. Me? Those are fixed and we cannot get those back. That's 60, as I said, 65% of the budget. And we're really limited as to what else we can do on the town side. Things like debt service, you're not going to go and make adjustments there. So mid-year cuts are extremely devastating in terms of what's taken place. What we've tried to do is not run out and replace everybody as they've gone through. So, and I believe the analogy I used when you and I were discussing it was that if your department had somebody leave, we would be slow to replace them. So it's not what I would call a hard freeze, but it's slow to replace them, so we take longer than normal. Then if Brian's department had somebody leave, we replace your guy and leave Brian's department without. And that's happened pretty much in every department. Probably Public Works has been one of the ones that has taken the hit the most of that. And we've tried to go back and now restore many of those positions, so we have those filled. But that's, we will look at doing something like that on an ongoing basis, so that helps us kind of manage that expenses and create some flexibility in our budget to handle any cuts the state might make as we go through this.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Bove.
It's a trick. Lauren Bove, District 7. We were just talking about synergies in between departments to save money. Would your conservation benefit from working with some of the other like Public Works, for example, when you're talking about needing someone to pick stuff up and
We work with them every day. So if there's, the equipment, there is synergy there.
does that help with the lack of that personnel?
We don't do a lot of, if I need extra help with, a sticky project, they'll lend us people, but that's taking away from their workload, so, there's, when you have so many guys, there's only so many work hours they can do. If the job, if we have more work than the hours, can capture, then we run into problems. But no, we work together on a lot of projects.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming, Brian. Next, we have Community and Economic Development. It's on page 86 of the budget book.
Gotta have light. Make sure you get my good side. Page 87?
Page 80, 86.
86 and 87.
And forward.
So I won't take too much time, but I think for those of you who did watch or participate in the Board of Finance hearings, there was quite a bit of discussion relative to some of the issues that were raised earlier. The major issue in terms of a budget, the increase here is reflected in one line, the fees and professional services, which we're asking to double. 30,000 of that increase is attributable to the Fairfield County 5 initiative that the First Selectman spoke earlier about. Each of the 5 communities have been asked to commit funds, commensurate with that, to pool our resources for joint marketing initiative. We're obviously attempting to leverage support from both private sources as well as the state of Connecticut to hopefully increase our effectiveness in terms of marketing Fairfield County and the state to New York-based and out-of-state companies. So I'm happy to answer any other questions that folks may have.
Any questions? Who's that? Representative Durrell.
Is it this one? That part.
Sorry. It's a trend, yeah.
Good
Okay,
thing
Mark.
this one works.
Yep. Anyways, I know Mike and you have talked about having like a grand opening once a week. How many have failed? I mean, I know many on Black Rock Turnpike.
Well, there is a certain level of churn that takes place in any local economy. So, most businesses, the issue is the first 3 to 5 years. So a lot of businesses, the statistics nationally are, a lot of those businesses do fail within the first 3 to 5 years of operations. I don't think that's necessarily the case. Some of the examples you're pointing to are issues that perhaps, the retail environment in particular is a very challenging one, and that's why, we've been working with our retail base to create a buy local campaign. There are funds for that initiative in this budget request. We think it's important to emphasize the need to support local businesses. If we care about our business base, and I think it's important that we provide those funds to, again, create more awareness around that issue. So I don't have a specific statistic, but there are certainly a number of businesses that have closed their doors in the last year. More have opened, so I think, on a net basis, we're doing quite well.
Okay. There was an article in February in the Connecticut Post about Milford's third brewery being opened, and basically it said in Milford last year they had 465 new businesses. Are we above that, below that, in the same ballpark? You definitely have to have a number.
Not with me, but I can certainly get that information. They're accessing the information through the Secretary of State's office, which is now available. There is no requirement to register a business locally through my office or anyone else. You'll have, obviously, a visit from the tax assessor to make sure that you're filing your personal property tax form. But other than that, unless you're a sole proprietorship, most companies are registered through the Secretary of State as a limited liability or LLP or general partnership and those types of things. And so that's where that information resides.
Okay, so if they have a number, can you get me a number?
Sure.
Thank you. Regarding the businesses at Sacred Heart, the incubators, are they under any legal or contractual obligation to stay in Fairfield if they expand beyond the campus, or can they leave like GE?
This program hasn't even launched yet. They're still renovating the space for the business incubator that, again, the first selectman referenced. I don't know if there will be a requirement. I doubt that there'll be a requirement that they remain locally. We do our best to try to keep businesses here. Our emphasis is always on business retention as the first order of business, to try to keep businesses in town. But certainly there are circumstances that come up where that's not possible. And if that's the case, I would prefer to work with one of my counterparts in one of the surrounding communities to keep them in state as opposed to having them leave out of state. So I have made referrals in the past where I'm not able to accommodate a specific need. For a period of a few months last year, I was getting a number of inquiries looking for manufacturing space, which is in short supply in Fairfield, and certainly not at the same cost structure that you would find elsewhere. And so a lot of those leads I was referring to neighboring communities where there was a lot more inventory available, and hopefully, again, that comes back as a favorable. We're assisting a business, trying to keep them in state, and they think favorably about the experience they had working with my office.
So they can do what they want, more or less.
I think, yeah.
Okay.
I think any business can. Sure, they're going to make a decision based on their individual business needs. You wouldn't expect otherwise.
Right. And also, lastly, there was an article in the New York Times in December about towns that are successful versus less successful. And it mentions how less successful towns or cities lagged in what's called traded industries, such as manufacturing or technology, which bring in dollars from elsewhere. Instead, they rely heavily on restaurants, retailers, and other non-traded industries, where money mostly passes back and forth between residents. What would you say most of the new businesses that are in our town are?
Well, again, I don't have the statistics, but I would say they're fairly evenly distributed amongst various sectors. I can tell you right now, our emphasis is, in terms of business attraction, is on knowledge-based industries, small to medium-sized companies that are located in the general geographic vicinity. That's where we're focused on. So the exact same companies you're looking at, that's the companies we're going after.
That's all.
Representative Pistilli?
sorry for the delay. Sharon Bastilli, District 3. Given the overall, economic climate and the general growth that we've seen in this corner of the state, can you tell me which initiatives have provided the best return on investment in the recent past, and which initiatives you think are going to deliver the best return on investment in the future? That's my first question. And then related to that, and as you're talking to prospective businesses to move to town, what is it about this town where we are getting the most return on investment to make ourselves attractive?
So I want to start with, how do you define return on investment?
In terms of time and energy spent, trying to attract certain types of businesses, and then what that gives back to us in terms of tax revenue and increase in the grand list.
So primarily as measured by an increase in the grand list. That's what we're looking at.
Grand list, yes, but then also, certain types of businesses have higher velocity of money in the community than others. So it's like how much money it would bring in. Like you could argue that lots of new restaurants might mean that a town is going to fail, but when you have 2 universities in it, that creates a lot of velocity of money, because you're bringing money from other communities through the parents of the students into our community, which turns into wages, which turns into taxes. So there are 2 elements here. It's one is how much the value of a property is going to go up, and then how much the velocity of money coming into our economy is going to create more wages and more taxes.
Well, I guess my concern would be on the taxes that actually would stay here, which would be through property taxes. So again, if we're looking at increase in grand lists, I think you have to start with working with your existing business base. That's where every economic developer starts, working with your existing companies and looking at opportunities to help them prosper and grow and possibly expand. It's a lot easier to retain the companies you have, the customers you have, than trying to go out and find new ones. But to the extent that, again, there's a little bit of a misnomer when you look at attracting new business investment. We're actually looking at development sites and assisting them through the regulatory process, ensuring that we have land use regulations in place that would accommodate the growth where we would like to see growth happen. And so we've spent quite a bit of time, the Economic Development Commission has spent quite a bit of time and secured funds to look at those opportunities, working with our Planning and Zoning Commission. So I would start with, what do our land use policies suggest? I think the plan of conservation development is a very important element, and we continue to support Planning and Zoning's efforts to update that. Part of that is looking at opportunities around our transit nodes. The first selectman alluded to it, but Fairfield Metro Center, that area has always been the manufacturing base or the commercial base for the town. So it's very much in transition. There are certainly opportunities there, and we want to make sure that we're in a position to leverage or take advantage of those opportunities, work with businesses that are looking to make those investments here, and make sure that process goes as smoothly as possible, and that there are really no surprises along the way. So I think that's, again, where we spend our time is, again, working with companies that are here, making sure we understand what their needs or issues are, trying to address those, any issues that may arise in terms of their interaction with the town departments. To the extent to which we can be helpful in that regard, we try to do that, try to come up with, again, ways in which we can creatively address those problems. Whether that's making, an application to our Planning and Zoning Commission itself to recommend a text amendment or change to the regs to allow for investment to take place. We've done that. And that's the type of creative problem solving that I think that you're looking for. So I think, I don't know if I fully answered all the components of your question, but I'm happy to come back if you feel like I didn't touch on something.
So if you're, thank you, I really appreciate that. And so to follow up then, looking more at the companies that would be coming in as opposed to keeping our current customers happy. For those who are coming in, what are you hearing from prospective companies in terms of what investments or what amenities they want to see in town? So how can we spend our budget money best to make ourselves attractive, to kind of create an upward spiral in terms of our grand list?
Yes, you did ask that question, and thank you for reminding me. I think, again, the number one issue that we hear from most companies is human capital, access to talent. That's what drives a lot of corporate relocation decisions, both here and nationally, internationally, really. That's where businesses invest their resources. Certainly in the case of the town, that's where we invest our resources in people. So that's a major part of our pitch, which is the fact that, you know, what distinguishes Fairfield from some of our Fairfield County brethren is that, you know, per capita, we have 2 universities. Certainly we offer a very compelling story in terms of quality of life, but a lot of other Fairfield County towns can say the same thing. We have proximity to the city and access to transportation nodes, the rail stations and whatnot. But again, what kind of sets us apart is the fact that we have a couple of universities here that provide the pipeline to young talent that many companies are looking for. And I think we're also making strides in terms of, while we do have a very diverse housing stock, we've also tried to address that recently in terms of providing even more housing opportunities that might appeal to a younger workforce, as well as the other end of the age spectrum. So I think all those things are key components of our marketing strategy right now.
Great. Thank you very much.
Representative Wackerman?
Karen Wackerman, District 7. Every year when we do the budget and I see your very lean staffing and budget, I'm always amazed at how much you get done. And I guess I just wanted to thank you for your efforts, and the fact that we had a $100 million increase in the grand list, I know was due at least in part to your efforts, and I'm very appreciative of it.
Well, it's a huge team effort here. There are a lot of departments that are involved, but what I've found here is that everyone does work together collectively as a group, as a team. So I think that's something to be proud of.
Representative Horton?
Margaret Horton, District 9.
Yikes.
It's easy to work it don't work.
Is it working? Is this working? Okay. I work in Westport, very close to Main Street, where every day I feel like there's a new empty storefront in comparison to downtown Fairfield, where there are so many, you know, small local boutiques, and often a lot of them are women-owned small local boutiques that just seem to be thriving. I want to commend you on the Buy Local campaign. The shop and stroll over the holidays was, I mean, it was a street party. It was fantastic. And I was curious if there was any other services, you know, you would want your department to be able to provide in order to continue to support this type of, you know, locally owned business growth.
We're always open to new suggestions. We're in fact working, there's a limit obviously given the resources that we have to what we can take the lead on, but we have certainly made known our desire to partner with other organizations to further, you know, the whole Buy Local theme and supporting local businesses. We're working with a couple of local merchants that would like to organize a downtown arts festival this June. They're taking the lead on it, but we're providing you know, support for that initiative. The shop and strolls, as you mentioned, we've recently partnered. We partner all the time with the Fairfield Chamber of Commerce, but we've partnered with a local social media company, that the Fairfield Moms, who have taken the lead again in terms of helping leverage what resources we have from a marketing perspective, and they've even taken some logistical or organizational issues off my plate, which is always appreciated. So recently, a property owner has also contacted me about doing something similar, a block party type thing at one of the retail plazas that he owns. And again, we're open to whatever suggestions are out there in terms of partnering, collaborating with folks, and trying to do our best to support the local business base.
Representative Fogel?
David Fogel, District 1. Even with your increase to $301,000 in your budget, that represents less than 0.1% of the overall budget.
Yes.
I'm just curious, I don't know the answer, but how does that compare to, let's say, the other Fairfield 5 towns in terms of percent of budget or spending per capita or some other relevant measure? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't offhand, but I can probably, well, I can get that information. I will say that of the 5 towns, only 3 have full-time economic development professionals working within their communities, Stanford, Norwalk, and us. And those organizations, from personal experience, are also operating fairly lean in terms of the number of people that are within each of those organizations. So I know Stanford has a much more robust budget. They've obviously spent, and they have other funding sources that help provide resources for their marketing initiatives. But I really think the answer in terms of looking at a business recruitment or business attraction, we need scale. So we need to be doing this as a region, not as individual communities, especially if we're looking to try to attract out-of-state companies. Out-of-state companies that are in the market looking at potential options where they want to be in 3 to 5 years are not looking at Westport versus Fairfield versus Stanford. They're looking at metro regions. They're looking at counties. After they do the initial cut and decide whether they're going to stay in this area and it's northern New Jersey versus Fairfield County versus Westchester, then they might look at individual opportunities within select communities. But we need to be in a position where we're making that first cut and we're competing against Westchester and northern New Jersey. And in order to do that, we just need to be operating as a region, as a collective whole. And I think that's where we have, again, the ability to get the return on investment that we're looking for here. We've tried a couple of outbound marketing campaigns focused on, again, small to medium-sized companies based in New York and the 5 boroughs in Westchester County. And it's hard to get enough traction based on that alone. So I think, it was good for us to do that. We got a lot of good information as a result of that. But I think working with our other Fairfield County 5 communities, we can have even more of a robust effect there.
Do you know how we compare to Westport specifically in terms of per capita or how big their department is versus
Well, they don't
yours?
have a department.
They don't have a full-time department.
No, they do not. Their economic development is, to the extent to which they provide resources toward this initiative, is out of the First Selectman's office.
Okay. And then, as you can imagine, I don't say this often, but if you had more money to spend, would it make a difference? And it's in the context of, I've watched these prior budget hearings for this cycle, and there was so much time spent on, for example, the $700,000 in paving. And that's a lot of money, and paving's obviously important, and I complain like the rest of the residents when I see potholes, et cetera. But, your budget's only $300,000. An extra $100,000, for example, $150,000. How much of a difference would that make, in your opinion, in terms of potentially generating commercial activity in our town?
Well, additional resources are always welcome. I try to make do with less, understanding the budget situation that we're in. To the question that was posed earlier, if you were to provide $100,000, could I show a corresponding increase in the one metric that seems to matter most, which is increase in the grand list? I'm not sure I could show that causality, that correlation between making an additional $100,000 investment, which will translate into a corresponding increase in development activity. I'd like to think we can make some progress there, but it would be hard to, because there's a lot of other variables that are at play. Part of our approach in terms of business investment is to demonstrate there's sufficient demand for office space, but we're working against a lot of that would precipitate or compel developers that might want to then build new office product here within the community. But we're working against a lot of other variables that are a lot of other macro factors that affect that. There's, the state is well documented. There hasn't been much job growth at all. The population is fairly level, except for Fairfield County. We have a lot of office space already on the market, so to some extent we're overbuilt in parts that are maybe more geographically advantageous or more proximate to the urban centers that are growing. So there are a number of other things that do affect that, and more resources are always welcome, but I think we're making good progress with what we have, and I think the answer is to continue to do what we can, working with, again, our existing businesses first and foremost, and then looking at opportunities strategically to encourage new business investment and development, particularly around transit.
Thanks.
Representative McDermott.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mark McDermott, District 7. Speaking of development activity, I believe I've attended 4 different either workshops or presentations on the development of downtown and Metro Center.
I can hear you.
This one's really good.
I do not know if this is the problem. I could be having a problem because of all the wireless devices.
Well, I left mine at home, so don't blame me. Can you hear me now? Thank you, Jerry. So I believe I attended 2 of the 3 workshops that were held here, presentations. I attended John Wynn's workshop at the Board of Ed, and I attended the original one, presentation about the Metro Center at the Fairfield Museum. I'm just wondering, where are we in this process, and when are we going to see more shovels in the ground in some of these places?
So there are a number of projects that, as you probably, having driven around town, know of. There's several assisted living facilities that are under construction. Trademark Phase 2 is under construction. New 36,000 medical office building is under construction. So there is development activity that is taking place in smaller projects, of course, that also add to the grand list. With respect to Fairfield Metro Center, I think that was your question. I know that they've made an application to the Inland Wetlands Agency. I believe that was what Mr. Carey was referring to earlier in terms of applications that are scheduled for public hearings. From there, then they will be hopefully making their presentation to Planning and Zoning. There's always a little bit of a lag, even going through that regulatory process once all approvals are in place, in terms of getting construction level documents and plans, getting their building permits, going through that level of review, and obviously arranging for financing. So it's not unusual to see 6 to 9 month lag after even all the local approvals are in place before shovels hit the ground. There's not too much that we can do to impact that schedule, although certainly to the extent to which we can identify those issues up front in terms of code review, that's a very effective tool that we use here to try to flag any issues up front so that they can be attentive to those as they, again, proceed to construction level drawings and seek their building permits.
How many years has the Metro train station been open now?
I think it opened December 2011.
Okay, so 8 years. In your opinion, would you say we are behind developing that entire area by a significant amount of years? I mean, we're putting this out now to probably, I just turned 58 on Saturday. I probably hope I see it before I either retire and move somewhere else or hopefully not pass away, but I'm hoping I see it before that. I'm 65.
You and me both. So I do think that you need to look at the entire area. When there's certainly been investment activity and development, and we talked earlier about a company that relocated from Stamford to Fairfield mainly because of its proximity to the new train station. So there has been activity. Obviously, it hasn't occurred on the Metro Center development site itself, and perhaps not as quick as any of us would like for the surrounding area. But part of that is, too, going through that process, working with the community, working with planning and zoning to ensure that our land use policies and regulations are appropriate based on market conditions and can support the types of development that we'd like to see happen there. And clearly, the site plan approval that was in place for Fairfield Metro Center, which called for 1 million square feet of office in a market where no new office is being built except for single occupant users, very much on a needs basis, but there's certainly no speculative office being constructed. It's just which would have increased our office market by a third. We have 2 million square feet of office space, so it just needed to be it needed to be adjusted, and I think that's the process that they've been going through. We did suggest that it would be helpful to work through this planning process with the planning and zoning, with the community and other stakeholders to make sure we identify whatever those issues are before they made a full application. But I think we're at that stage now where they're making that application.
Thank you for the update, and thank you for inviting me to all those different
Thank you for coming.
meetings. Well, I learned a lot, so thank you.
Further questions? Representative Lefkowitz.
Hi, Nancy Lefkowitz, District 1. In the world of community and economic development, and thank you for all the work that you do. In the world of community and economic development, is there sort of a gold standard of a community in similar size and scale in the country? In particular, I'm thinking about the West Hartford development. Is there a gold standard for what is aspirational? And if yes, have you connected with that community? Have you traveled to that community?
Well, I like to think that we're the gold standard, honestly. But yeah, I am on the board of our professional association of economic developers in the state. I interact frequently with colleagues, not just in Fairfield County, but around the state, including my friends up in West Hartford. And we do share information about what's working, what's not working, best practices. And I think that's part of the importance of those types of professional association networking, providing funds as modest as they may be for travel and meetings and professional development opportunities, because I do think that we learn from each other all the time. And I will say that the CEDAS, which is the Connecticut Economic Development Association, is planning to unveil shortly a certification program for Connecticut communities to benchmark ourselves, and we intend to to be part of that process. We were certainly part of the, I was certainly part of the process to develop the certification program, and we think that's important, again, to try to raise to lift all boats there in terms of ensuring that we're at the top of our game.
I think we're the gold standard too, by the way. Can I ask one more question? And you talked about your first point is working with existing businesses. To that end, what are some barriers to entry in allowing that and enabling that process to happen? Are there barriers?
There was a question earlier in terms of resources, and so yeah, we do have about 3,000 businesses here in town. We like to prioritize companies that we think are important to visit on a regular basis and make sure that we understand what their issues and needs are. So we do make it a point, some of our larger taxpayers and employers, to visit more often than smaller ones, but they're all important. Some of the issues, it varies, but there are oftentimes these little minor irritants that can turn into much larger problems if they're not addressed. So we do, I got one of the big issues from all businesses of all sizes is signage. Our signage regulations, and we've talked about it, but I think at some point I hope to convene a small panel with our Planning and Zoning Commission to talk more about, I understand the regulatory aspect and the need to have standards, but at the same time, there's obviously a balancing act that needs to take place. So these are all examples of, recently we've had a couple issues where people have made applications for other permits, not gotten the result that they were looking for. We've tried to counsel them through that process and even taken the lead in crafting language or seeking appropriate variances to avail themselves of that opportunity. So it really varies, but I think that's part of what we bring to the table is just that there's oftentimes many different ways to solve a problem. We just have to look creatively at what those solutions might be, and we're open to all those.
Further questions? We do have quite a few other line items. This has been a very interesting discussion, but any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming, Mark. Next, we have the Human Resources Administration.
Good evening. Good evening, Emmett Hibson, Human Resources Director. I'm on page 83 and 84. So I'll be doing human resources and risk management. I think they kind of skipped over that in the agenda, but I'll be hitting both of those now.
So, do you also have active employee benefits?
I do not. That'll be handled by the finance director.
Okay. Well, okay. So, I don't know if you want to give us anything on Human Resources Administration and Human Resources Risk Management, or just take questions. But
so, just quickly, my budget's broken into 3 different areas. It's operations, insurance and claims, and workers' compensation, heart and hypertension. The operations budget is $565,000, most of which is salaries. The main item I have there is fees and professional services. It was $64,000, brought it down to $55,000. It's actually $44,000 for fees and professional services now. We split $11,000 out for our applicant tracking system. That's the main item there. My insurance and claims, we have gone. There is a slight increase because we had a deal in place with Kerma, which is our insurance carrier. That ended last year. They have given us a new 3-year deal. It includes a 5% increase this year. And then our workers' comp, we've been pretty good at controlling costs there. So that's my budget.
questions? Representative Tallman.
Is this working? It is. Hi, I'm Peter Tallman, District 8. I was watching the Board of Finance meetings and the insurance claims, which went up drastically, 26%, liability insurance 10%, risk management fund 16%. And I think the reason you thought it might have been was concussions. I think that was what you were
All
referring
right,
to, that
so
line.
you're talking specifically about my Board of Ed athletic policy, which is in my liability line item. So that went up from 40,000 to 52,000 last year. So what happened, even though you didn't see it in last year's budget, so what you see now is actually we go out to, our broker goes out to bid in November, December timeframe. We don't actually place our insurance until late June. So right now, these are bids, and we are trying to negotiate these down. But due to claims and due to the fact that most people got out of writing policies in Board of Ed's scholastic sports, we were stuck with an increase that came in late last year. So it's actually flat this year, but from a budget perspective, you're seeing an increase of 25% to that line item.
Okay, because I had spoken to the athletic director and one of the trainers, and they said not only are all sports injuries way down, concussions are way, way down because of practice procedures, equipment, rule changes, and things like that.
That may be, but from an insurance perspective, so the way this works, this is a separate liability policy. So our liability policy has a deductible of $500,000. So it's an insured program that we have, but we retain the first $500,000. This policy takes over for interscholastic events from $1. So we don't have any exposure from $1 through our $500,000 deductible. So because it's such a low threshold, there's not a lot of people that want to write this policy. So that's where it is now. We can get rid of it and keep our liability policy for where it is at the $500,000, but we just felt for the additional $10,000 that we would pay it.
One more question. One thing I didn't know, it's actually not a question, but something I learned that might be of interest. If you have a child that plays sports in high school and they get hurt, your personal insurance is the primary insurance cover, not the school's.
Correct.
Okay, I thought that was kind of surprising. After a while, it started to make sense because I guess they'll cover the deductible, everything, but they want your insurance company to be the primary.
Correct. So if you have a high deductible plan, we would pay more than if you had a POS plan or what have you.
Okay, thanks.
Sir.
Further questions? Seeing none, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Next, I think we have the Finance Department. We'll take them one by one. You have a lot of items, but.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'll just briefly go through them, each one quickly, and then questions. Active employee.
I'm sorry, Mr. Honor. We've all sat through the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance meetings. Can we just move to questions?
You can certainly, you have certainly have my permission.
If there's anything you want to.
Start from the beginning. Start from the top.
I'd like a summary.
Bob, if you want to just give us a very, very thumbnail sketch, and maybe just focusing on the updates, if there are any.
I can do active employee benefits
Yeah.
in about 2 sentences. It's experience through February. It's up 0.6% for the year for 3 major reasons. We've had excellent experience, and we have, through union negotiations and contracting, we have increased premium cost shares on the employee side and increased employees co-pays.
Questions on active employee benefits? Seeing none?
Going to 2010.
Yes.
Contingency.
Contingency.
Has got 3 items in it. $500,000 that the Board of Finance put in there to cover potential future paving. $300,000 normal contingency, which is what we put in there every year, and $28,000 for potential contract labor negotiations.
Okay. Questions on contingency? Representative Vergara.
The button further down, further down. Go. This button.
Jill Vergara, District 7. Sorry about that. I'm just perplexed by the 500,000 earmarked in contingency. Is this a normal practice? It just seems, just from a linguistic standpoint, an earmarked contingency sort of is an oxymoron. I thought contingencies are for unanticipated events.
The attitude of the Board of Finance was they had concerns about the increase in paving this year versus prior year, and they were looking for a more complete, comprehensive paving work plan schedule for the year by streets, et cetera, et cetera. So they reduced the budget by 700,000, and then they went back and put 500,000 of that back in contingency, subject to a presentation by the First Selectman and DPW and Mr. Michelangelo and Mr. Bartlett to the Board of Finance to explain their work plan for the year. To spend money out of contingency requires the approval of the Board of Finance. So basically what the Board of Finance has done is put that money under their control.
It also lacks some transparency for the voters, it seems, because it's not budgeted in DPW. So I have a problem with that.
Yeah, I understand.
Further questions? Representative Pistilli?
Sharon Pistilli, District 3. In recent memory, have we ever had to have DPW and the First Selectman go before the Board of Finance with a plan for paving?
I think that during the budget process, there's generally a paving plan presented, and there was a paving plan presented during the budget process this year as well.
I want to clarify. So usually we just have a paving number. Mr. Moderator, through you, may I please ask Mr. Michelangelo a question related?
Related to paving
To the
as
to the
reflected in the
contingency.
contingency line?
Yes, and I promise I'll talk really quickly. Hi, Mr. Michelangelo. In the recent past, have we ever had a situation where we put paving money in contingency and then you've had to go before the Board of Finance to spell out how you're going to spend $500,000? I could think off the top of my head where we can spend $500,000 on paving. Start on Palomar, it's really bad.
No, I don't believe so.
Representative Georgiadis?
Drew Georgiadis, District 9. Mr. Michelangelo and Bob Mayer, so this contingency is specifically only controlled by the Board of Finance. It's taken out of the department that needs the money and put into like a slush fund?
The contingency account, are you talking about this particular $500,000 or the
Yeah,
contingency
because the
account in
only
general?
people that can access this,
500.
any contingency ever is through permission through the Board of Finance?
To transfer money out of the contingency account, it must be approved. Transfers must be approved by the Board of Finance, correct?
Thank you.
Representative Gerber?
Hello, Bill Gerber, District 2. I feel bad. I didn't catch this at the Board of Finance meeting, so I've got a little catch up to do here. This sounds pretty wacky to me. I'm glad you're both at the table. It was my understanding that we have a long-term plan. We aim to pave a certain amount per year, in tough budget times, we may underpave in order to save money. But then we have a backlog. We sort of have a plan of how many miles of road we're going to pave each year. There's no magic to it. We know that if we do less, we fall behind, and we may end up with longer-term problems. Potholes turn into bigger problems that require streets to be torn up when they could have been just paved. So it would have been my understanding that the plan that Mr. Michelangelo came up with, you can confirm this, was a plan to sort of make up for what we hadn't done and sort of get us back on track to where we want to be in paving. So I am confused why the Board of Finance would think that it would be within their power or good government for them to have control over release of funds for paving. But if you can tell us why this might make sense, you know, it'd be helpful. Thanks.
And until you started asking questions about the Board of Finance, everything you said is pretty correct. The DPW has a plan. The plan used to be that we're going to fund paving $3 million every year. It used to be a capitalized expenditure. They got transferred from capitalized into the operational budget. I think it was a $3 million projection for the year for the plan. Now, a couple of things have happened since then. Oil's gone down, so therefore the cost of asphalt's gone down. So there are reasons to have an adjustment besides just budgetary reasons. And you're also correct from the perspective that during those heavy budget years, DPW was, you know, did a good job on a limited budget, managing the roads, but tried to be sensitive budget, kept it down to a minimum. And you're also correct in that it was always the intent that when we got past those years, we would increase the budget, that the administration, DPW, would be able to increase the budget. So all that's correct. The rest of it I can't respond to.
Thank you. Mr. Michelangelo, this is a formula, right? Like, yeah, sure, the cost of asphalt may go down, but we have had many conversations in my few terms on this body that we've heard that if you don't pave your X number of miles, we have what, 250, how many miles, 250 miles of road, we pave
275.
275, we pave 13, 14, whatever, a year, and if we don't do that, then we fall behind, there are cracks, the cracks, get worse, and then we end up having to chop up the street and put a whole new street down much earlier. So there's a formula, there's no, no offense, but this isn't like something that Mr. Bartlett doesn't know and that yourself don't know it really, really well. So this makes no sense to me that this, unless you think that we actually don't need this, or that you're willing to take a longer term hit, or that the Board of Finance is thinking that we are okay, breaking up roads because down the road maybe things will get better than actually doing the maintenance work by the, sort of the regular paving schedule. How does this fall under the Board of Finance? It makes no sense to me.
Now, when Public Works Department submitted our Public Works Operations budget, it's an increase, the overall budget is an increase of $2 million, approximately 15%. That's what we submitted as part of our request. So a lot of those items were reflected in the amount of capital vehicles we purchased, the drivers, the salary increases that made up for the 5 or 6 year gap that was mentioned previously, an increase in contracted services. So in submitting the request for the paving line item for $2 million, yes, and Mr. Mayor threw out the number $3 million. We certainly have more than $2 million worth of roads every year, and we certainly need to do that much every year. But in putting together this request with a $2 million increase of 15%, once again, we certainly needed more paving money, but once again, it's not a standalone line item. It has to stand up for the whole Public Works Operations budget and the whole town budget as a whole. So some of the conversations at the Board of Finance level is, well, if you could, if there is 2.5 million or $3 million worth of paving. Why didn't you request that? Once again, it was done in the context of the Public Works operations budget. We provided a list. We can do $2.7 million worth of work this year and next year and the year after. There's more than enough roads to pave. And we could identify.
Okay, thank you. I mean, this isn't, this isn't your, yeah, well, it sounds like overreach from for them. It doesn't sound like it should fall under their jurisdiction, and I'm going to have to think about what we can do as a body to correct this, because I don't get upset about a few things, but just hearing about this upsets me a little bit, and maybe we can learn a little bit more about it as we go along. Thanks.
Representative Herron.
Thank you, Doreen Herron, District 9. I think the piece that's missing here, and maybe for Representative Gerber, is that it's my understanding that the budget was set and then there was money added back into paving, but then at the Board of Finance, the first selectman wasn't there to answer some of the questions. So it's not so much that there was not a paving plan in place, it's just that why was there additional money added on after the initial budget was released? So because they couldn't ask those questions, my understanding from watching the Board of Finance is that it was a compromise to put it into contingency so that we could have those questions asked before that money was approved.
Further questions?
Representative Iacona, District 8. Thank you, Representative Herron. That's exactly what happened. The presentation made by Mr. Bartlett was that he budgeted for $2 million and that the first selectman added $700,000. The Board of Finance asked if that was enough money, the original $2 million, and the department said yes. And then there were questions surrounding why the first selectman put $700,000 into that budget that could not be answered by anyone present at the meeting. So they reduced the number to set $2 million, re-examined it after some conversation, decided to cut 200 and put 500 in contingency, which is well within their purview. They put plenty of things in contingency all the time, trucks, other things. We've seen it done before. We've seen members on the other side of the aisle get angry when certain members cut things here that the Board of Finance put in contingency. My question, Mr. Moderator, through you to the first selectman, what was the thinking behind adding the $700,000 back?
Mr. Tetra?
Oh, thank you. It's actually about as simple an answer as you can get. We had planned, I'm going back close to 10 years ago, to do about $3.5 million in paving each year. And we built up to that level, stayed at it for a few years. We had revenue issues the past few years that have been well documented. We had choices between cutting back on services, laying people off, and making major traumatic adjustments to town, or cutting back on capital projects, this and some equipment purchases, so we cut back on this. There was quite a bit of commentary by the Board of Finance a year ago questioning why we were cutting it back. Why weren't we following a plan? What in the world were we doing? The point then was that we cut it back in order to maintain a reasonable tax rate. The plan then was to restore it when we could. We did not restore 100% of it, but we did restore a significant portion. We're following the same plan we've had for 10 years. Cutting back on this at the Board of Finance level made no sense. In addition to that, the Board of Finance was added $700,000 in cuts by my administration, by the Finance Department. That easily covered this makeup within that. In addition to that, they cut 200 grand out of paving. All right, we are behind in our paving. That was the point that was made by the Board of Finance a year ago. It was made by several members of this body a year ago. Guys, we're just catching up. That's all. We got to get back to 3.5. At some point, we'll probably go over that 3.5 to make up for the last couple of years where we didn't do as much. All right? We're just catching up. The plan is the same plan it's been for 10 years. We've got 270 miles of roads. Department of Public Works laid that out. We have professionals on Department of Public Works. Let's give them the resources they need. There is absolutely no reason to cut this back. We are not fully restored to that $3.5 million a year level. We're not doing the amount of paving from a maintenance standpoint we need to. Fortunately, Public Works does an extremely good job, is extremely good at setting their priorities, and I think have about 7 different ways to pave roads in order to spread the dollars out. The quality of asphalt isn't as good as it was 20 years ago. It doesn't last 20 years anymore. Our Public Works folks are exports. They've won awards and been recognized at the state and national level for the work they do in paving our roads. People from other public works departments come to Fairfield to study how they do it and see what they can do to be more cost effective in their towns. I hope that helps clarify it. Guys, the goal is to keep increasing this every year that we can till we get to 3.5 million. We'll probably exceed that for a little while to make up for some of the years we didn't do as much. And when Public Works says we're caught up, we'll come back down to the 3.5 million a year level.
Thank you. There was also discussion at the Board of Finance, and I believe it was unanimous, so it was a bipartisan decision to do the 500,000. Is my recollection correct? Mr. Mayor, do you recall? I believe that it was, because the Board of Finance also asked for a plan from DPW on what they were going to do with all that paving, and they said they'd have it ready relatively quickly. Is that accurate? Is that ready? Is that, now I'm getting into paving that's coming later. Maybe you can answer that then, but.
Yes, we submitted them several years' worth of roads to be paved.
So you got them a copy of that updated plan?
Correct.
Awesome. Could we get a copy of that as well? It's on the website with all the additional stuff? Excellent. Thank you very much.
Further questions on contingency? Okay, so seeing none, we'll move to the next item in the finance department that you're here for, Bob.
Finance department is pretty generic. The only thing of note is that we reduced the fees of professional services line item by 40%. Other than that, it's the total change is increase of decimal 0.16%. It's all salaries and wages.
Just so we're clear, you're on line 3010. Is that what you just did? Page 141. Any questions on the finance line? We did not. Seeing none. Did you have purchasing and administrative services?
No. Can we go down to fund
balance?
Fund balance.
Okay. Page 95.
Fund balance is an interesting, there was a lot of discussion about this and everybody came to agreement. The goal, the Board of Finance passed a fund balance rule, or policy, excuse me, to increase the fund balance up to a range no less than 7%, no more than to fund operations, and had gotten down as low as 3 to 4%. So in the few years that we've had this policy in place, the policy is basically do no harm every year. In other words, do not use any, at least do no harm, and try to increase it a little bit. The town has been very fortunate to have some very high positive surpluses, which has brought the fund balance from that lower, 3 to 4 to 5% level up to currently a 10.87% level. So when you pick a number to do no harm, it would be very easy if you knew exactly what this year's operations were going to end up at, and if you knew exactly that next year's budget would actually come in right on budget. Because, for example, if you put a number in there to do no harm, but then if you have a positive variance in expenses, you actually increase the requirement for the fund balance more than you've put the money in there. So you kind of get a deficit from the word go. So we played with several different methodologies on how to, address this from more, flexible kind of approach. And we came up with the one that ends up, I think, with a $1.3 million increase to fund balance versus the 1.740 that if we did it the usual way. Just as a point of note, given the forecast of what we think is going to happen this year, the fund balance at the end of the, for this fiscal year, the fund balance at 6/30, 2019 will be above the 11% range.
Questions on fund balance? Representative Fogel.
Hi. David Fogel, District 1. Just a quick question. I was going to ask this anyway. There's a summary page, page 3, and it talks about the tax levy, et cetera, and there's a line credits, use of reserves. Are you familiar with this, or?
You're talking about debt service? You're not talking about fund balance?
Okay. I'm not sure, but I'm talking about on page 3, talking about the overall budget leading to the tax implications. There's a line, use of reserves.
Yes, okay.
Okay. Just, it's my own ignorance, I guess, but can you explain, is there any relation to the surplus here that you're talking about to the use of reserves? That's my first question.
No.
Or are they totally unrelated?
Totally unrelated.
Okay. And then if you know the answer, on the reserves, can you just explain that item? Because it looks like a pretty significant use of reserves.
I think 1.4 million.
Looks like a bigger number to me, but
2.258 million.
Oh, the full debt service reserve. Okay, there's 3 components there. At the end of any fiscal year, when we have a surplus, you can let that surplus drop to the bottom line, or you can park it to help reduce future year tax requirements from operations. So for example, let's say that we had a surplus of $3 million in year A. Okay, if you can reduce that to you can let that all flow to the bottom line, increasing your fund balance percentage, or you can put that money, what we do with it, what's been done a couple of times, you put over in debt service, put in the debt service fund. So next year, when you produce your budget, you have this reserve amount in your debt service fund, which reduces the requirement, the pay down requirement for the debt. Doesn't reduce the pay down requirement, but it reduces the new budgeted amount for the pay down requirement because you have that reserve in there. Did I explain that clearly at all?
Yeah, you did, and I don't want to dwell on it, but I'm just...
So basically, so 2 years ago, the Board of Finance and the town bodies voted to, actually this happens in September, the Board of Finance voted to allocate some of the surplus to reduce future year tax increases. So they parked some money in the debt service account, and the debt service account, and that's now being used to reduce this year's tax increase.
Right, so that was sort of my initial question, because they are then tied together in the sense that if you have, the more surplus you have, the more available potentially to use.
Well, it didn't go into surplus.
No, I understand.
Yeah, it kind
But it
of
was-
slid by surplus and went over into future operation debt, budget, correct.
But that,
potential.
yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Had you not moved it over, it would have then
Yes, sir.
increased the surplus.
Yes,
So I guess my big picture point is, well, sorry to dwell on it, but I think this is important. The 2.2 million use of reserves that's projected.
Yeah, well, it's not really a use of reserve because basically that's 3 different numbers. When we sell bonds, we sometimes get premiums. You know what those are? Do I need to go into that? Okay. So when you get a bond premium, there's basically IRS, SEC rules of how you can use that bond premium, and you can't have arbitrage, et cetera, et cetera. So to avoid any conflict, any potential conflict with those rules, but the money has to be used to pay off the bonds. Can't be used for operations or anything else. So to, excuse me, to avoid any conflict with those rules or potential conflict with those rules, that premium, excuse me, is allocated over a 3-year period. So if we issue $20 million in bonds, if we end up with $1,500,000 premium payment out of that bond issuance, then we would, that $1.5 million goes in the bond premium reserve and gets used $500,000 each of the next 3 years. So of that $2.2 million, $2.3 million that you're seeing, $1 million of that is bond premium utilization.
Okay.
Then another $1 million of that is the use of funds that were parked in the debt premium account, in the balance sheet account, by the Board of Finance 2 years ago. And that's the last of that. We used some of it last year as well. And then this is the end of that.
Well, is it the end of it? So there's no more left?
There's no more left.
Okay, so it's possible then next year we won't have the same amount available, so all things equal,
yeah,
we could have, it would increase our taxes even more, all things being equal.
There's not increased the taxes more. Basically, what the Board of Finance did by doing this is avoided double taxation in a way. You'd already been taxed, the taxpayers had already been taxed for the money that we ended up not having to spend. So we used it to reduce the taxes the following year. Now, when you run out of that, then you're back to your normal tax rate.
Okay, got it.
Right. Now, and like for this year, we're looking at a positive variance as well, so they could possibly do it again this year. But that would take place in September, after all the books are closed, and you see where your fund balance is, where you want to be, what the future looks like. It's a planning mechanism.
Further questions on fund balance? Representative Durrell.
Thanks. Question about our ratings. Is that fund balance or?
Fund balance definitely ties into.
Okay, all right, good. I guess we market ourselves as one of only 4 towns with a AAA rating. How much does it cost for each rating agency? I asked that because when I got that, a friend of mine owns a multi-million-dollar financial services company in another state. He looked it up, and not all towns and cities have 3 ratings. I mean, there are towns that are doing pretty much as well as us with only 1, Fitch, or excuse me, Moody's or S&P. Why do we use all 3?
Well,
and how much do they cost?
I'm not sure anybody only uses 1. I thought most people used at least 2. But,
all right. Well, how much does it? How much does it go from the second to the third?
They cost between $15,000 to $25,000 each.
So it's basically we're spending an extra $20,000 perhaps to get an extra rating agency.
Yeah. If you want to look at it that way, yes.
Okay. I mean, do we make money? I mean, does it turn out to be a good investment?
It's a positive thing.
All right.
Further questions on fund balance? Seeing none, what do you have next? Debt service?
Debt service, which Mr. Vogel already took us through.
Any questions on debt service? Seeing none, you have retiree benefits too?
OPEB and retiree.
This is page 265.
OPEB is other post-employment benefits. It's primarily health care for retirees. We have we are the town kind of led the way in the state recognizing this liability and funding it. And we have an actuarial evaluation every other year. This current year is the year of the evaluation. What they call, there's the ADEC, which is the actually determined employee contribution. And the town has a policy to fund this at the exact ADEC. And so the budget amount is the actual evaluation for the ADEC, excuse me, for the ADEC.
Okay. Questions on OPEB? Seeing none, any questions on pension?
The pension, first part of the pension piece is exactly what I just said about the OPEB. We fund 100% of the ADEC. Just for your information, the police and firemen's pension plan is funded at 90.1%, and the town employees plan is funded at 89.2%. Because of our excellent investment returns and some other favorable issues in our evaluation for the premium plan, our actual total ADEC went down by $81,700. The Board of Finance didn't want, they kind of have an informal policy to, until they get up to like 100% funding, to not reduce the total funding. So they increased this line item by $81,700.
Questions on pension? Representative Fogel?
Just a quick, David Fogel, District 1, sorry. To what extent are retirees contributing for health or pension?
All employees contribute, I think, was it 4%? Yeah, 4% per year, maybe some are 4.5% per year, I'm not sure. That's part of the union contracts. There's 7 union contracts. 4 is the minimum, I think there's some 4.5s in there. But when you retire, you don't contribute anything.
No contribution
No,
to
there's
health?
contribution to the health care, the OPEB.
There is or not?
There is.
There is to the
Yeah,
health?
to the OPEB, not to the
Okay.
pension, yeah.
Okay. And the contribution for health, is it a steady percentage or has it?
Contribution to health, again, determined by the union contract that was in force when you retired. So it wasn't, so people who retired prior to year X, I don't know exactly what year X would be, 2012, have 100% coverage. I came employed here and got involved with union contracting right about that time. And now you pay what you paid when you retire.
The nominal amount or
Well,
percentage?
It's like 20%.
So
18%.
percentage stays
The percentage,
constant?
yeah, the percentage cost share.
Even if the cost goes up?
Pay the percentage.
You say pay the percentage, so the dollar amount goes up?
Correct.
But prior to 2012, 0?
Correct.
Thank you.
Further questions on pension? Seeing none? Is that all we have for you, Bob?
That's
think
all I
that's it.
have, and it's
All
always
right.
a pleasure to meet before you guys, and
Thanks for coming.
and Pam, I thought I'd get a comment from you on that fees and professional services going down, because that, if you remember, that was where we.
You know what? I noticed that at the Board of Finance meeting, and I was very happy. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't bring it up. Great job.
No, that was, you were part of that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next, we have purchasing. Page 144.
Good evening. My name is Gerald Foley. I'm going to be presenting with the purchasing and also for the admin budget. For the purchasing budget, I've asked for a part-time person, but otherwise there was no other changes in the budget.
Questions on purchasing? Representative Lopez.
Is this where I can ask about fuel prices?
I'm sorry?
Is this the right place to ask about fuel
If
prices?
it's a line item in this budget, yes.
Is it, well, because every department that has a fuel line, where, like, who's responsible for purchase, that's a thing that what they do every year?
If you can tie it to the purchasing department, the question then.
Well, I'm asking if this is who is in charge of the fuel contract for the town.
It's
Are you-
DPW, isn't it?
Yes.
Who purchases, you purchase
Yeah,
the fuel?
yes.
Okay. Aaron Lopez, District 2. I just noticed, because last year, a big line item increase was fuel in a lot of different budgets, but this year it seems to be down pretty significantly. So can you just explain what the, what happened this year with the fuel?
Well, basically, it's just the commodity market, so this year it's more favorable, so the price, we've got a better price on the fuel.
You purchased for the year?
Yes.
Thank you.
Further questions on purchasing? Representative Pistilli, maybe? No?
Hi, Sharon Pristilli, District 3. Is there an economy of, like, opportunity for economies of scale in purchasing, like with other towns? Like to create a consortium with other towns? Does that exist?
Yeah, the town does participate in some consortiums, but it depends on the commodity that we buy. So right now, I can't think of one that it would be more favorable for us to go on. But I know we buy our vehicles, we buy off of a state contract, and so we do try to take advantage of other cooperatives that are in place.
Further questions on purchasing? Seeing, Representative Gerber.
Hi, thank you. Quick question, are you in charge of solar contracts?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions on purchasing? Seeing none, well, yes, Representative Lefkowitz.
Hi, Nancy Lefkowitz, District 1, following up on Mr. Gerber's comment. Are you connecting with the Sustainable Task Force and the committee to look at more sustainable options when you're making any of these purchases? Is that part of your accounting?
Not part of mine, no.
Further questions for purchasing? Seeing none, administrative services?
Yeah, there was no, basically,
Right.
it was flat, relatively flat budget.
Thank you. Any questions on administrative services? Seeing none, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have the tax assessor, page 147.
Good evening,
Ross.
Ross Murray, the assessor. Just want a couple of highlights
So
on.
just any highlights you want to give us, just briefly?
I think the two biggest increases I have are under software for $31,500. That is a mandatory upgrade to our computer-aided mass appraisal software. The company that does that for us is changing versions, and so we either need to upgrade or switch vendors. I will be looking at other vendors to see if there's a viable option, but we will have an expense item there next year. And the other one is about a fourth of the cost of the reval that's coming in 20. We'll start that at the end of this budget, or end of the 20 budget cycle, so we'll have about $100,000 estimated incurred in this budget.
Questions for the tax assessor? Representative Vergara.
Jill Vergara, District 7. I wanted to take this opportunity to just recognize all of the work and time that you spent with the Senior and Disabled Tax Relief Committee. I don't think that everybody realizes that you attended the majority of our meetings and participated and submitted a lot of recommendations and just devoted a lot of time to it. And I really appreciate all of the work that you put into it. We had 18 meetings over the course of, maybe 14 months. And you attended the majority of the meetings. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we couldn't get you all of the administrative changes you were hoping for. And I do have a question about some of the budgeting issues for a mailer. For this budget, do you think that you have money there for a mailer next year?
No, that I had put some money in for that, an estimated amount. I think it was about $3,000 between printing and postage, and that was removed.
Okay. And going forward, maybe we can advocate for that in the budget. Thanks.
Further questions for the tax assessor? Representative McDermott.
Mark McDermott, District 7. Ross, I was watching the second quarter review, the Board of Finance review, and we had a positive, I'd say it's negative to the seniors, but we had not as much of a lost revenue for this year from the participants in the program. What is that number? The budget was 3 point something. What are we actually spending? I think Bob at the time it might was over $300,000 to the.
What was it about? Yeah, I think that sounds about right.
So we're not spending as much this year on senior. $371,000 we're not spending that we had budgeted. Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Durrell.
With reevaluation whatever the damn word is, would we be able to figure out what each RTM district is now in terms of what they pay for property taxes and what it will be after the revaluation? Granted, it might be a redistricting, but...
Once the reval's done, we can figure that out.
Okay, good, because for those of us who may, God forbid, still be here, I'm not sure, we might have some questions to answer. Thank you, I'll ask you then.
Sorry, go ahead. I don't keep data by RTM district. Right. I don't know if, I'm sure it's possible, I'm just not sure how we would cut that up and figure that out, but it should be possible. Right. Okay.
Further questions? Representative Gerber.
Hi, Mr. Murray. Thank you. Bill Gerber. Do you have like a high-level summary, or does your office create a high-level summary of the grand list, sort of the changes in the grand list?
Yeah, I did some highlights.
It's on the
We
internet.
gave it to the Board of Finance.
Okay, so it's under the Board of Finance.
Right, and it lists, like the top 10 increases and where they came from.
Thank you.
Further questions for the tax assessor? Seeing none, thanks for coming, Ross.
Thank you.
Next, we have the tax collector, page 151.
Good evening.
Evening. So I don't know if there's any highlight for the budget you want to share with us, otherwise we can just take questions.
Just some outliers. So my advertising is up, but what happened was the Fairfield Minuteman went out of publication, and statutorily I'm required to do legal notices every 3 months, quarterly, when the bills are due, and that's now done through the Fairfield Citizen. So there's a change in the rate. The other, under IT software, there is a mandatory cloud-based backup that we do with our software through my vendor. And that was not done in the past, so that that accounts for another additional increase.
Questions for the tax collector? Representative Gerber.
Hey, Bill Gerber, District 2. Thank you. Nice to see you. I can't recall, my memory, I'm getting old. You lost a head count a few years ago, maybe. Did you get that head count back? Or,
no.
How's the workload in the office? Are you still squeezed?
Yes, yeah, I'm still squeezed. One of the compromises or solutions that I've suggested, which is in this budget, is having an overtime budget. and the overtime budget would cover the collection months, mainly July and January, the two busiest collection months, where I would have my staff work, whether it's before or after hours, whether it's a few hours before, a few hours after work hours, processing payments. Because the issue being is, ever since we've lost a position in the office, we've had trouble keeping up with processing payments, and it's a chain reaction. What happens is we get behind on processing payments, and then we get backlogged with phone calls from taxpayers that send in their payments in a timely manner, but they may not see their payments hit their bank account, clear their bank account in 5 to 7 days, and then we have to handle those phone calls. So part of my idea is, if we have a little bit of extra overtime to process these payments after hours when my staff is not busy dealing with taxpayers in the office or over the phone, they can process these payments in a quicker manner to reduce these phone calls, to reduce, taxpayer headaches and confusion as to why their payment sent 5 days ago did not process as quick as they thought.
Thank you. Has the human resource squeeze has it affected your ability to collect at the delinquent? I think you were afraid possibly that it might affect the ability to sort of interact with people who might be delinquent at one point.
Yeah, at this point, it's more just dealing with the speed at which we process payments, like I had mentioned.
How far behind do you get, you think, at its worst?
During a collection month, it can be anywhere from a week to 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you.
But like I said, it's a chain reaction, so once we get behind and once we're trying to catch up on those payments, we're bogged down by the phone calls as a result of getting behind on those payments. So it's the intent is to eliminate the phone calls so that we can't get caught up on the payments.
Thank you. Well, thank you for going above and beyond. Appreciate
Thank you.
Questions for the tax collector, Representative Lefkowitz?
Hi, Nancy Lefkowitz, District 1. Can you talk a little bit about the tax sale and who it is that you target specifically and how you go about figuring that out?
Okay. So the town has projected a tax sale for this upcoming fiscal year, but I don't have a target at this point. It is something that I would discuss with the first selectman and the finance director as the upcoming fiscal year unfolds. So I don't have an actual, I don't have an actual set of properties, an actual dollar amount, but we would discuss it and come to a criteria. So the way it works with a tax sale is you set a criteria. I'm just throwing examples here, but you say, a certain amount of years or a dollar amount due, and then you would go from there. But it's nothing we've discussed yet.
If I may just add one thing for that. Ideally, we won't have a tax sale. Ideally, what we'll do is try to encourage people who are behind on their taxes to voluntarily pay. So it's not certain there'll be a tax sale. There'll just be a strong emphasis initially on getting funds in from some of the people who owe taxes. And then if that doesn't work, then we'll move into a tax sale.
Further questions, Representative Durrell?
Yes, thank you, Alex Durrell. How People's Bank or whatever, what percentage are using them? What percentage are using the credit card machine? I know you'd mentioned that last year and all that. Is there an uptick or?
Yeah, it's approximately 8 to 10% that pay online. I don't have the amount that pay at the branches, but it could be like 2 or 3%. But it is something that we do encourage taxpayers, but it is something that we always have to educate taxpayers on year after year. But those are the approximate numbers.
And those that use that credit card machine with a 3% surcharge, I mean, at town hall there when you're.
Yeah, so that is a service we offer,
Right.
but that is, it's 2.95% with a credit card, or else it's 95 cent flat fee through an e-check option. And that is pretty standard, whether you're, any town in the state, they're going to charge a fee with that service. But it is a service we offer. It is a service that, yes, people don't like the fee, but unfortunately there's no way around it. But they do find it convenient in the event that they've attempted to or were unable to clear their entire day to pay their taxes and go to the DMV. They come to us, they can pay their taxes online at Town Hall. We also offer at the kiosk the ability to pay their registration for their re-registration of their vehicle at Town Hall as well. And then we clear them to do that. So it's kind of one-stop shopping. They're able to accomplish two things all at once at Town Hall when typically they'd have to clear their entire day to go to the DMV to do this.
Okay. And I used to come into your agents or your office to ask if anyone's ever given you extra money. I mean, like, was it Roy Diallo at Bridgewater just gave $100 million to the state of Connecticut education? I mean, someone can come in and just give you a check for $10 million, correct? Although, didn't you say he has to go through the RTM or something like that?
I mean, to be honest, I've never had anyone offer me extra money for their taxes.
Well, not you, but the town of Fairfield, of course. It would, to save some money for other taxpayers.
I mean, I've always told people they can look up anyone's taxes, or they can pay their best friends or their neighbors' taxes if they're in the mood to do it, but I've never had anyone pay more than what they owe.
Right, I know, but someone could gift the town of Fairfield. Basically that's what I'm asking. Instead of, making me pay, they can pay my property.
Yeah, I mean, they probably could, yeah. But I mean, that would be beyond me. I'd have to speak with the town, because any payments that come to my office that constitute an overage, I would have to treat it as a refund or a transfer.
Okay, the store is open now.
Yeah.
Further questions for the tax collector? Representative Fogel.
David Fogel, District 1. The budget book says that your budget increase of 5.9% is due in large part to contractual wage increases.
Correct.
And maybe I misheard, but you were talking about switching to overtime for some of your workers, and I thought you said that was a significant increase over a contributor of a significant contributor to your increase in expense.
No, I mean,
Because that's non-contractual, right? And I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, that's non-contractual, and that's just based on the reduced staffing from 2 years ago and the pursuit to keep up on payments, process payments in a more efficient manner, and reduce phone calls and taxpayer, confusion and inquiries.
Good. And then I'm just curious, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but do other administrative departments, I'm not talking about police, fire, do they also pay overtime to some of their workers? Do you know the answer to that?
Well, I can speak on experience. When I was a tax clerk for the town of Southington about 10 years.
I actually meant in Fairfield.
Yeah.
You might not know.
Historically in Fairfield. No.
Okay. All right.
I've been here 2 years, so I don't know. Off the top of my head, I don't know historically in Fairfield.
Does anyone?
It's for other departments.
On election night.
This is his.
That's Betsy's office, clerk's office.
Okay.
Right. Registrars, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, my reaction here is in response to reduced staffing that happened when I started.
Understood.
So there was more staffing before my time, so I really can't speak for before that.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Iacono.
Pam Iacono, District 8. Thank you for being here. And I want to thank you. It's obvious to me how much you care about your job and customer service and the people that you deal with. You came here immediately under a tough circumstance and were forced with structural change. But I want to just let you know that I really think you truly rose to the occasion. I really admire what you did. You did exactly, I was one of the people that voted to eliminate that position. And you did exactly what I was hoping you would do. You looked at your department and you figured out a way to do all of this in in a way that didn't really disrupt services and got things done, and you looked at things, you were forced to look at things another way, and you did. And just to put all of this in perspective, we cut a clerk typist at approximately $55,000. There's been no massive disruption to service, and you're realizing you're a week or two behind, so you've looked at a solution to that that's going to cost us $3,500. That's excellent. So I really thank you. I appreciate that. I know there's more you want to do, and if you had that other person, you'd be doing some of those things. But you know, you came here, you looked at it, and I thank you for it.
I take customer service very seriously. I'm very fortunate that I have a seasoned staff that has been able to handle this change. There were other hurdles, such as 6 months after the staff reduction, we went through the federal tax plan, which involved, I'm not sure if all of you are aware, but you know, there is a lot of real estate accounts that get paid through escrow, through banks, and because of the federal tax plan, a lot of those payments were coming directly by the taxpayers instead of the bank. So December of 2017 was probably busier than any July in the last 10, 15, 20 years. You know, but we rose to the occasion, we handled it, and you know, I came from a small town, so I am used to waiting the counter, dealing with the taxpayers face to face. It's something I enjoy, it's something I don't mind. And so, you know, what I did was I just started taking tax payments in the hallway, because I said to myself, you know, Fairfield is a wonderful town, there's a lot of history here, and I did not want to become the first tax collector to allow the line of taxpayers to stretch across Town Hall. It actually started going up the ramp, and it actually made it almost, you know, a few feet away from the other side of Town Hall. And I said, this is crazy. You know, I can't let this happen. And I actually had, you know, a lot of favorable responses. I had someone that just came off of leg surgery. They said they got to a point where they could no longer stand anymore, and they were very thankful that I came out there. I took their payment, and I, you know, relieved them from standing in one spot for so long where they couldn't do it anymore. So.
Further questions for the tax collector? Representative Lopez?
Just had one quick question. You zeroed out seasonal payroll. Is that what you're making up with overtime?
Correct.
And what is the advantage of the overtime versus the seasonal for you?
So the logic there was, with our department, we're very busy in a season. We're busy in a quarterly basis. So we collect taxes on a quarterly basis every 3 months. July and January are very, very busy months, and I'd be hard pressed to find someone on a seasonal basis to say, hey, I only need you for 3 months or 4 months in July. And first of all, to convince someone to say, hey, I only need you for 4 weeks, not, you know, 20 hours every week for 12 months. So by the time I would train them in the first week, I would only have them for 3 more weeks. So my thought is I could get a lot more, because I'm looking for volume, processing payments. I could probably get a lot more out of my staff in just an hour before work or an hour after work when they're not bogged down with answering phones and waiting on customers than I'd get out of someone that is only being promised, you know, a couple weeks of work.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Next, we have information technology, page 155.
Dave Kelly, Town IT. If you looked in on the Board of Finance meeting, I think you kind of already know what we've been up to and where we're going. So the highlight is that this year's budget is a little bit less than last year. One of the main drivers of that is that we just finished replacing the town telephone system, and we expect the operating costs of the new system to be lower than the old system.
Questions for information technology? Seeing none, I'm sorry that we made you wait all that time.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Public Safety Fire, page 169.
Good evening, Dennis
Evening.
McCarthy, Fire Chief with Deputy Chief Karen Dunn.
So I don't know if, any questions for fire? Is there anything you want to update us on?
So we approach the budget process. We're responsible for the main fire department budget, emergency management, the regional fire school, and the water service budget. We approach all of them very conservatively. The budget increase, despite a 2% salary increase for the bargaining unit, this budget represents just under 1.7% increase. As you see in the budget, there are a lot of zeros, a few areas that we're required to adjust upward, but kept the budget increase to a very low amount.
Questions for the fire department? Representative Tallman.
Hi, Chief. Peter Tallman, District 8. I think I asked you this last year, and I'm going to ask the police chief again this year, and a few other departments too. Is there any way to reduce the overtime? It's 26% of the budget.
So the overtime budget we maintain by design 4 vacancies. And those 4 vacancies, so we're authorized staff of 23 on duty 24/7. One of those positions on each shift is filled by overtime because it's less expensive to, if you factor all of the benefit cost, it's less expensive than hiring a person to fill that position.
That's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
In addition to that, we cover, certainly there are some departments that overstaff. They have a 23-man minimum and they staff 24, 25, 26, and that's customary in the fire service, anticipating vacations and vacancies so that they can drop 3 without incurring any overtime. That would be counter to the philosophy of the town of Fairfield, is to keep headcount to a very low amount with some permanent vacancies. So we're counter to some of doing the exact opposite of what some other fire departments are doing. And lastly, we have tremendous talent in the department. The deputy chief and I are the only daytime administrative personnel in the department. We have tremendous amount of talent that spend a considerable amount of time while on shift, day and night, working on administrative projects. And we value their contributions because they're closest to the work. They understand it, they have specialties, but because that talent is spread across 4 different shifts, there are occasions where we need to bring them in on overtime to work on. And we have 3 major projects this year, $8 million worth of projects between a radio system upgrade, the merger of our ECC with Westport up at Sacred Heart, and a new ladder truck. $8 million of project. The deputy chief and I manage most of that, but from time to time, if we're sending people out to inspect the vehicle while under construction, that would incur some overtime costs. So we are very deliberate in our approach and very conservative in our approach to overtime, but it is part of maintaining the level of service that we do.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions for the fire department? Representative Georgiadis.
Drew Georgiadis, District 9. I just want to say thank you. Chief, you have worked well with a lot of my residents, and in conjunction with Public Works. The aggregate pile was a big issue for a lot of my constituents, and I am so impressed by how you guys work together, pulled together the transformation of the area behind the fire station and with Public Works. So I just want to say thank you very, very much. You spent so much time, and it's appreciated in my district, District 9.
Well, we want to be good neighbors, and there was talk earlier about synergy, and I think that certainly between police, fire, and DPW, there's a considerable amount of synergy and collaboration to serve the residents. And many times it doesn't matter which department, and we work together on a daily basis. And I think that that's one of the projects that results from that collaboration.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Gerber?
Chief, thank you. Great to see you, and thanks for your great work. I was just thinking about the regional training facility that you run. Can you just give us a high-level overview of what you do there, how often, and do we make fees from that?
So this is a self-sustaining operation. When the state funded the reconstruction of the regional fire school, the first selectman directed us to create a separate budget for the school and to have it self-funded. And we do that, sorry, Jeff, no problem here. And we do that by collecting fees. Any programs that we run at the regional fire school either break even or make a profit. And the town of Fairfield's obligation, if you remember the discussion last year, we had initially proposed, because the state grant to fund the regional fire schools had not been approved, and we submitted a budget for a town of Fairfield contribution to operating the school to pay for Fairfield Fire Department training at the school of $58,000. We're able to get the state grant, which is now codified in the state budget at $70,000 a year. The town of Fairfield's contribution to the Fairfield Fire Department training at the school is $25,000. The rest of the budget, which is $173,000, is driven by grants and fees.
So by having it here, it sounds like we've lowered the potential cost. Had it been somewhere else, it would have cost more.
So by having it here, we don't have to send Fairfield firefighters out of town on overtime to receive the training. We get the benefit of any state, regional, or federal programs that are offered in the region. We get to host them in Fairfield and send our personnel on duty to attend those. So there is a great benefit.
So it sounds like you're happy that we did it.
I am very happy, yes.
Fantastic, thank you.
We're the envy of the region, for sure.
That's fantastic, thank you.
Further questions for the fire department? Including the emergency communication center?
Nope, ECC is the police department.
Okay.
Emergency management is the
Emergency management, sorry, or the fire school? Seeing none, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Next, we'll move to the police department and the emergency communication center.
Good evening, Chris
evening.
Liddy and Don Smith from the Police Department. I believe we're on ECC first.
Correct.
And we have no objections to deferring right to questions.
Questions on the ECC? Seeing none, we'll move to the police department budget, page 176.
And we'll defer right to questions.
Okay, we'll go right to questions. Any questions for the police department? Page 176. Seeing none, I think fatigue is set in. If there's
that
no
was our
questions, thank you for your time. We do have a question.
I'm sorry.
It was not for nothing.
You know, on the
Gerber.
ECC, I was just wanted to clarify the timing of, or do you think the potential timing of the consolidation at Sacred Heart?
Our goal is open date January of next year. We think we're on track for that. Few things still need to be worked out, but it's going very well.
And can you remind, is that that's consolidated with, is it with Westport or?
Yeah, the current plan is a consolidation between the town of Fairfield and the town of Westport.
Not
to dispatch all emergency
just the two,
services.
okay. Thank you so much.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Next, we have Public Works. And I think we'll take it line by line. I think the first is building. I think the first is building. I don't know if there's. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Any questions on 550 building, page 199? Seeing none. Next, we have Public Works Administration. Is there any questions on Public Works Administration? This includes public, this is on page 199. Any questions? Yes, Representative Beauvais.
Hi, Lauren Beauvais, District 7. I remember talking to you last year about the cuts to your budget, and I was concerned about how your department had to function during those cuts. I'm sure it was difficult. Are you concerned about you not having the whole paving budget? I think some of it is in contingency or something.
Yes, obviously, we would like the whole paving budget restored. Once again, we requested $2 million. We're fortunate enough at the Board of Selectmen level to get it increased to 2.7. We have a plan which is on the website for that $2.7 million worth of paving. We would like to do that, but unfortunately, it was reduced to the at the Board of Finance level. So hopefully,
If
it'll be
you get
restored.
that back, will you be able to do everything you had planned?
Correct, and we have, once again, the $2.7 million worth of paving we plan to do is on the budget website now.
What will you do if you don't get it?
Well, that list will be redlined and, approximately, whatever, a quarter of it will be eliminated or
And
deferred.
it just affects paving. The contingency is just for paving, not any other part of the budget.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Iacono.
But just to be clear, Mr. Michelangelo, the only thing that was cut from paving was $200,000. There was $500,000 earmarked in contingency for paving, correct?
Correct.
Just to further clarify, I apologize, it's late. The Board of Finance, when they asked for the updated plan, there's a new one that's posted online that they didn't have before. Is that, or that's the plan that's always been online and you're working on a new one?
I believe the 2.7 has been there for, when they requested, when Mrs. Gardner was here, she was nodding that it was there. So we could find out the date it was posted. But.
Okay, no, I just wanted to make sure the one that's up there when we go look is the one that they had asked you guys to put there.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions, Representative Lefkowitz?
It's really just a comment, Nancy Lefkowitz, District 1, and I just wanted to express my disappointment in that $700,000 cut, and I appreciate that 500 is in contingency. It just seems like an extra step when you know that that's money that you need, and the 200,000 is a cut, and that's disappointing because the single biggest complaint I hear in Greenfield Hill is the lack of paving or the fact that it needs to be upped and that it's not sufficient. So I appreciate that you're doing the best that you can. It's not an indictment of the work you're doing, but rather the lack of funds to be able to do it effectively.
Further questions? Representative Georgiadis?
Drew Georgiadis, District 9. I would like to thank you guys as well. I thank the police, the fire department. You guys have worked really well in my district and done a lot of fabulous things for my constituents, so thank you very much. But to follow up on Representative Iacono's comment, my work with you, you guys have always been consummate professionals. You're extremely knowledgeable, and the moving the money into contingency, even though it's supposedly for the paving, I don't think you guys need to be micromanaged like that. I think you're absolute consummate professionals, and I would support putting that money back in so you, the professionals, can manage the money that you've requested, which still falls way short of the $3.5 million that was in the 10 or 20-year plan that was, that you put forward and worked so hard to develop. Thank you.
Representative Lopez.
Hi, Erin Lopez, District 2. I have a paving question, but it's not what you think. So I'm in District 2 where they've recently put in a lot of gas lines, which includes, as I'm sure you know, ripping up a big portion of the road. And the patchwork that has been done is poor, to say the least. And I'm just wondering what the company's, what their obligation is to the town to repair those, and how that contributes to the degradation of these roads, which were paved pretty recently, if I remember, within the last probably 5 years.
The gas company is required to pave the road to, or the trench, as good as, better or equal to what was existing. So what you
Who
see there.
decides that, though? Because it's really not.
Well, once again, I'm not sure what road it is, but once again, what you're most likely seeing is a temporary patch. That will be permanently patched. A couple of the things why you don't want to permanently patch it too quickly is because there is some settlement that may still occur. So you want to give it several months, and not all of the lateral individual services probably has been connected.
Okay, I'm talking about Churchill, Crest.
Correct.
Yeah,
That's all temporary,
Okay.
done in winter conditions.
Got it.
So yeah, that'll be permanently patched. But that's a brand new gas line, so hopefully the people along those streets will decide to connect to natural gas within the next several months when we permanently pave it, or else we get the condition nobody likes, where after it's permanently paved,
Then
houses
people want-
start connecting and the road will be dug up again.
I waited 10 years, and the year after I moved off the street, they got gas. So. And then my other question is about the capital vehicle plan. I see that it's a big line item this year. Does that put you back on track for your 5-year plan that we've talked about a lot?
No, we're still short. So we were fortunate enough way back in 2014 to buy 7 vehicles in one fell swoop through a capital appropriation. Well, through the tough budget cycles, no, we haven't caught up and we're behind. So we project that probably, and I'm not sure we have the numbers for that, but approximately the same amount next year and the following year to be caught up.
Okay. So can you just tell me, you're replacing obviously things that are going out, or are you just buying new to add to what you have?
We're replacing existing equipment that has outlived its service life, and 3 of the 5 this year are the 6-wheel dump trucks, which are the heart and soul of our operation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Representative Herron.
Hi, Doreen Herron, District 9. I think it was touched upon at the Board of Finance meeting, but I wasn't quite clear. Is there a number for savings that we might be realizing because of the gas work, the lines done where they're going to repave afterwards? Is it taking some of the roads off of our plan that would bring us savings?
Yes, and we are working with them, and we try to get as much as possible with them. And I think Scott Bartlett could talk about some of the collaborations on some of the streets, some of the areas where we've gotten actual money for projects.
And I guess along with that question does it affect, because I think to me anyway, that was a new addition to when I've heard your paving plans before, was all the gas work. So is there a way to have that incorporated into, for us to understand? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. But just to give you an example, 39 roads in the Reef Road or beach area are being dug up by gas as what was last year's phase. 3 of those roads were on our paving list. 36 were not. So we celebrate that we are getting some money from the gas company, but theoretically, even if we split the streets in half, we're paving 36 roads that we didn't feel were in our plan, only getting the benefit of 3 roads that were in our plan. Now we fast forward to the next phase, which they're starting next month, another 20 roads off of Beach Road. It's phase 2 of this gas upgrade. And I would say 5 or 6 of those roads are on our paving plan. So once again, 3/4 of them are not. They're mandated to restore the trench. We've been fairly lucky that they've been splitting the roads in half with us, mostly because we get better costing, so we share that costing with them, so they're willing to do half the road with us. But basically, The days have gone by. They used to give a credit to the town, and the town could actually make a little money because if we can get it done cheaper, we could take their higher costing credit and put it towards our roads. They no longer do that policy. Now it's pretty much I pave the road, show them what I did, and they'll come up with a unit price to support that funding.
And do you feel like when it said it had to be done to the degree or better than, is there degree of, is it matching what you think? Like, are we losing money in that respect, that they're not up to par what we would do?
No, I don't think we're losing money, but I don't think we're gaining money that we used to be able to gain in years past. We quantify, so the problem with any type of gas service or water service that happens, let's say you have a 30-foot road. They run the gas down one of the shoulders, usually 3 or 4 feet off the shoulder. So now, effectively, they've ruined, because we don't want a little sliver. So let's say the trench is 4 feet off the shoulder and it's 4 feet wide. So now that's an 8-foot lane out of a 30-foot road. We'll get them to give us the 15-foot restoration, but we're buying the other 15 feet, if that makes sense. But here's the real killer. Everything on that main side is called the short side of the trench. That's being covered when they mill and fill that section of the road. Then we have the nasty long side of the trenches. That's what we have to deal with. That's why we opt to mill and fill the other side of the road in lieu of all those trenches. So if you have a 40 houses on a street, if 20 are on one side, that's the short side of the main, 20 are on the long side of the main. We could just say restore the 20 on the long side, but we don't think any resident wants to drive down one lane that's beautifully paved and 20 trenches in their neighborhood, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Georgiadis.
I'm going to buy you guys mics out of
Thank
my
you.
budget.
Yeah. To follow up on Representative Herron's comment, because we live in the same district, there was a lot of paving done down there after Hurricane Sandy, and those roads were newly paved by the town of Fairfield, and now they have a huge trench down the front. So these were not 20-year-old roads that have been dug up. So, you dig up a 3-year-old road, and then you repave it. I don't think there's a lot of cost savings there, and I hope that you guys will keep an eye on it, because right now, those trenches are not up to par. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And again, I share your opinion that the roads are in disrepair now based on the gas company work. But I also will tell you, check back by like June, we'll have everything done curb to curb, and your faith will be restored.
Thank you, Scott.
Representative Lefkowitz.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, this may be a question for Mr. Mayor, but I'd really love to understand in dollars what it is, and perhaps this is a simple answer that I should know off the top of my head, but what the dollar implication is for the taxpayers when we're talking about cutting $200,000 in terms of paving, what that would really translate on an average to the taxpayer.
For the average household?
For the average household.
Mr. Mayor, is that something you could answer tonight? $10 a household?
So $200,000 cut would translate into $10 on average about, we think, for paving. Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Representative Gerber.
Sorry about, keep going on paving. Did you get ground rules from the Board of Finance as to sort of how you're going to go back to them and what criteria they're looking for when you want to dig into the 500,000?
Via an email, but I can't say I know it verbatim. I did get an email notifying the department of the cuts, but once again,
Is it like every X amount of $100,000 you need, or is it sort of, do you need to show them the streets? Are they going to want to go out and determine whether the streets need to be paved or not? Or?
I know we have to go back to them, but I don't know of any set criteria.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions? Representative Tallman.
Hi, Peter Tallman, District 8. Scott, thanks for your help in my district. Just to follow up on that, I remember I talked to you about the road between Sturgis Park and Carlton, that was a disaster. It was just paved, and it was dug up for gas lines, I guess. And then a few months later, it was a temporary fix, and it was paved over beautifully. But yeah, it was not good for a while. I know there's a bunch of roads temporarily asphalted that hopefully will be dug up and paid for by them. But I did have a question. I know we're subbing out more work, and even though the budget in 18 was, or what we spent was a lot less than what we budgeted, but I was hoping to see more of a savings in either personnel or equipment or trucks if we're adding more money to subcontractors. But I'm not seeing that, and maybe it's because that number a year ago was very low and we didn't spend all the money. I don't know why, but will we start seeing anything if we're subcontracting more services out? Should we see some savings in some other areas?
And once again, when we subcontract out, we try to sub out the stuff that, and I'd use the word unskilled more than anything else. So custodial services, cutting grass, it saves us not only the manpower, but buying the mowers and stuff. And I'll just point to one item. So contracted property services, if you compare FY16 to the current year budget, yeah, it went up about 300, probably about 350,000. Once again, if you go to the regular payroll from FY16 to FY20 is basically dead even with those salary increases you were talking about, and even the part-time and the other labor type accounts are all basically flat or even a little lower.
Great, thanks.
Further questions, Representative Pistilli?
Sharon Pistilli, District 3. I had a quick question on electric utilities. It looks like if you look at a 4-year pattern, they're down about like 40, I didn't get to do the math, 40%, from like $1 million to 568. Is that due to all the solar and all the sustainability projects?
Yes, we have made inroads in that, but once again, there are some accounts that have been carved out to pay for, so now just for the budget process, we did a review last year, so now there are budgets for, so like for the park rec, for the marina, those are in different accounts. Fire Training Center has their own account. So some have been carved out, so it's a combination of both.
Further questions? Representative Lopez.
Hi, I think it's a quick question. So the golf course project, that is not this year's budget, is that correct? That would be 21 for the paving that you're going to be doing?
Correct, yeah, we haven't identified that in this operating budget.
And then do you anticipate a lowering of man hours based on all the time you've had to spend working on repairing things at the old clubhouse?
And I wouldn't say I don't think we could quantify, so there are some issues, obviously, when you have a 45-year-old building versus a brand-new building. So we will save some man hours at that facility. That building had chronic plumbing issues, so we spend a lot of time up there. It's a no insulation building, so we had HVAC problems. So there were some quirks there that required more work than a regular building would.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Walk.
Jay Wolk, District 5. First, I want to thank both of you very, very much for everything that you do for us. And all, really, during snowstorms, I can't thank you enough. The wintertime was great. We didn't have much snow, but thank goodness. But so my question goes back to, we don't need to cut a lawnmower, right? So trucks and things that you need, are you okay with what you have now? I mean, I remember, I think last year we talked about you needed a truck, but we didn't give it.
So going back to Joe's earlier point, the 1.3 you see in the budget this year is the plateau that we feel we'll be at for the next 3 subsequent budgets. So it's really 4 years at 1.3. That will be us made whole on what we call the $100,000 trucks and above. So that's all our heavy equipment, payloaders, street sweepers, backhoes, 6-wheel dump trucks, 10-wheel dump trucks, garbage trucks, all those trucks. We think that number is going to drop for a few years, and then we'll be hitting back to our 12 and 15-year cycle. In a perfect scenario, we'll need 3 of those vehicles a year going forward. And again, what's tricky is it's over $100,000 number, but one year if it's a payloader, it could be $225,000. If it's a 6-wheeler, it could be $200,000. So there is some volatility. I think a fair number sitting here today, after the 4 years of quote catch-up, is about $750,000 annually on the big trucks. Then there's a small component of the budget for hand tools, for smaller trucks like pickup trucks, things of that nature.
Thank you, so you're okay, right?
I feel if we get this funding and stay at this level for 3 years, we're about 8 trucks behind. So that will make us whole, and it's a combination of catching those 8 trucks and following the plan the next 4 years. If we just focus on the catch-up and don't follow the plan, the number's going to go lower than the 1.3, but then we're going to be back here telling you we're falling behind again. So the 1.3 is a combination of following the plan and catching up with 8 trucks that we're behind.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions? So anything else on either Public Works Administration or Public Works Operations?
Just one point that, so the solar contracts are paid out of Public Works Operations. I know Mr. Gerber had a question on that before. These guys need.
Can you say that again?
Very bold to invite a question.
The solar agreements that the town has is paid for out of the Public Works Operations budget. So the account that you see that's labeled utilities, electric, PPA, power purchase agreement, that's how we buy our solar power from the installs.
Representative Gerber. Thank you for raising that. We were just actually talking about this. Do you also manage the Board of Ed solar contracts?
We're involved in the installations, but after they're online, the Education Department manages those.
Okay, and because I saw some figures that looked like we're not getting the savings that we had originally projected from those contracts. And I was wondering if you could sort of comment on that, or if we could get sort of a summary of the expectations versus what we're getting and what we expect to get in the future.
Mr. Bowman and Mr. Morabito from the Education Department both work on that closely, so we'll follow up and get you some numbers on how they're doing.
Mr. Bowman was walking up, but I guess the question is pertinent in that there are some proposals for additional contracts, so that are in some interesting.
We are getting the savings that were projected, but the projects sometimes come online a lot further along the way than we thought they would. Like the one at the landfill took 2 years before it actually got permitted by D and UI, so we lost 2 years of savings in effect. So that's a big savings, but we'll have it in the future. It'll be there still. So they're 20-year contracts. So.
Right. So the annual savings that you project are based on sort of the price of whatever oil or electricity that you would normally get, that you get on sort of the non-solar.
Yeah,
right?
it's solar versus the price that we bid it out. And of course, if UI's prices go up, well, we're not going to get the savings we projected either. And that's happened a few times where we're paying UI more money than we projected, so we're saving less than we projected.
Wait, if I thought if UI's prices go down, right? Then
no, I mean the total bill would be less. You combine solar with UI, the savings aren't there.
Right.
Yeah. You get more savings in the solar versus UI.
Do you track like sort of the kilowatt, or whatever the cost of
Per hour, yeah.
per hour that you get from the solar versus for that component, what you would have got, what you would have had to pay with the alternative, with the original?
Yeah, because we know with the solar contracts what we're going to pay for 20 years. Some of them are fixed for 20 years. Some of them go up 1% a year, up to 15 cents a kilowatt hour. They can't go beyond that. So we know what we're going to pay for solar for 20 years. We just don't know what we're going to pay on the market for anything else.
And the market, we know what that is because we're paying it on the rest of the town.
Right.
So then, do you have numbers on the difference?
Yep.
Yeah. Because I guess there's a couple pretty big proposals coming on board, and we want to look at that, I guess, to see.
Yeah. Well, the biggest ones are out there already, like the parking lots at Ludlow and Ward were the biggest ones.
Right.
And, there's some rooftops at schools, some parking lots at schools coming. We're running out of buildings to put solar. That's the thing. But,
Right. So, and the contracts, are they all entered into with? I mean, is there one vendor or several?
There are two. We did an RFP years ago. We had 5 responses of people that wanted to do it, but the restrictions we put on them, a lot of them dropped out. When we had them guarantee that over 20 years they could not charge more than 15 cents a kilowatt hour. That's what we were paying 5 years ago. 3 of the companies just dropped out. They just would not take that risk. So the other 2 companies have, and primarily we use one company for the larger projects, the other company for smaller projects based on their past experience. So it's worked out very well.
And the leasing is the way to go. You would never want to own.
Excuse me?
Leasing is definitely the way to go for.
On homeowners,
No, I'm talking for the. We lease.
I mean, basically, it's a power purchase agreement. It's not a lease.
Right. Okay.
We're just guaranteeing that they'll sell us power cheaper than we can buy it anywhere else for 20 years.
Okay, so it's their equipment. We don't have any interest.
They design, build, own, operate, maintain, insure. There's been some problems like at the rec center where trucks have backed into it and knocked things down. Well, they have to come in and fix it.
Okay.
We have no responsibility for it whatsoever.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you.
Representative Farnan?
Brian Farnan, District 9, just for clarification for your point about a power purchase agreement versus owning it, one of the key benefits of doing solar is a federal investment tax credit and a certain type of depreciation that you could receive on those assets. So from a government perspective or a nonprofit perspective, they're better off not owning it. They're better off having the commercial entity own it because then they can get those benefits.
Right. So we get the benefit through a better rate.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Representative Georgiadis?
Couldn't do it.
Drew Georgiadis, District 9. I'm on the Roger Sherman Building Committee, and I've been talking to Sal Morabito, and it didn't seem that initially that there was any kind of plans for solar on the roof of Sherman, and he said he was going to contact you, and are all the, so my question is, does that kind of, because we don't own it, does that fall under FEMA? Would that go against our FEMA budget? Do you have any idea? And
No.
Or do we need to replace the roof before we put the solar on? Is that the thing that's delaying solar on Sherman?
That's the main thing, is the roof has to have a 20-year lifespan if you're going to put a 20-year project on it. So some of the schools, we've been waiting until the roofs are replaced and then proposing solar.
And that new roof would be paid for out of the BOE budget?
The roof would be paid for like, any capital project, right?
But not through the town, or does the
through
school?
town bonding, yes.
Out of the board of?
Yeah. The roof itself would pay for it as any roof would be.
Okay. Except. Okay. I'd like to see that happen. Thank you.
Me too.
Further questions? Any questions on solid waste and recycling? That's page 228, line 6070. That's also under Public Works. Representative Pistilli.
Sharon Pistilli, District 3. Could you give us a back of envelope synopsis of the situation with recycling costing us $20 a ton as opposed to it used to be a rebate?
Well, actually, recycling is going to cost us $110 a ton, not 20.
I thought I had read $20 a ton somewhere.
that's 8 months ago. Basically, what's happened is, again, we went to single-stream recycling nationwide because China was taking all the recycling and paying people for it. Well, China stopped doing that because a lot of that recycling going to China was just being landfilled. China now has decided they're going to recycle themselves. So without that customer paying for that recycling, we have to find places in the United States to do it. There's still some in Vietnam, there's some in Indonesia, but it's very small compared to what was in China. Trying to find the place in America means we're going to start paying for it. And what's happened is that's one part of it. That's the plastics especially. On the other side, the glass recycling is zero. It's cheaper to build new glass than it is to recycle old glass. There is no market for recycled glass. So it costs more to get rid of recycled glass than it does to make new glass. You combine those things, and the cost of recycling has gone from where we're getting paid $20 a ton, where we're going to pay $75 a ton July 1st, plus $30 a ton to get the residential recycling to the recycling facility in Shelton. It's going to cost more to recycle than it is to burn garbage in Bridgeport on July 1st. Now, over the period of years, that'll change because now there's a market in the United States for, where people can get paid to recycle plastics. There are half a dozen recycling plants going up for 3 through 7 in recycling, which is the one that's very hard to recycle. They're going up. There's a glass recycling plant upstate Connecticut now, but it's full. There's a company proposing to build a glass recycling plant in Milford, actually, which would take that recycling and mix it with concrete for building blocks. So in a year or two, there's going to be a market for it. I think our prices will come down. They will not go. We will not get paid for it, but we won't. I think we'll be paying $20 less at least for doing that. So until that time, we just have to suffer. And again, there's been proposals to do away with single-stream recycling. But no, the answer is you can't do that because so many towns have spent millions of dollars buying trucks and equipment. Example, in our area, Bridgeport, Stratford, and Milford, all our municipal pickup, they spent $30 million buying this equipment. And it's going to stay that way. The answer is we have to educate people not to put certain things in the recycling that they used to. The number 3 through 7 recycling is not a mandated recycling. We can put that back in the garbage. So I think over time it'll change and we'll come back to where some sort of reasonability anyway. That's the $2 version anyway.
Representative Lefkowitz.
Hi, Nancy Lefkowitz, District 1. If the state changes the regulations and the rules around recycling, would we see a significant reduction in your department's expenses?
I don't think it'll be significant because right now there's a bill that I've testified for and it's been unanimously approved by the Environment Committee and being sent to the whole legislature. And it would set a system where DEEP would not be allowed to mandate recycling unless there was a process in the state to recycle it and a market to use it and it costs a reasonable amount of money. That's one thing. So that would prevent them from saying number 3 through 7 plastics is mandated. It also would take glass out of being a mandated recycling until facilities are built to use it. Those proposals are up there now, and that would certainly make a difference. But we're still not going to get paid for it. It's still going to be a cost item, not a profit item going forward. It'll never be a profit item again. So.
I do recall at the selectmen you had a unanimous from the 3 members talking about how they would support your efforts, and I hope that they've in fact been, or will be able to help you moving forward on that.
Representative Georgiette, no. Representative Gale.
Hi. Sorry. Good evening. There we go. I know it's late. I'm sorry to keep you for an extra minute, but my question is just about the dump and is there much of a revenue that comes in from the metal recycling? And what is the situation with that? I had a constituent who raised an issue with me, so I'm curious.
Yeah, we do get paid for metal recycling. Basically, we pay a hauler to take it to the recycling facility, but we keep all the revenue from it. So in the end, there is a slight profit from metal recycling. The market for aluminum and metal has stayed high. So that's always been high, so that's good. There's still, paper is still working, not all paper, but they're at least breaking even or making money on paper. Plastic and glass are the big problems.
So I'm just to explain what the situation was. Apparently, there are cameras that are set up there to make sure that citizens are not taking anything from the metal area. And there was, just sort of an innocent thing where someone wanted to reuse a motor and was, threatened with fines. And there's been a lot of, I've seen actually that happen several times where citizens feel like they're actually, they're just up, there's so much talk about upcycling. And we pride ourselves on being a green town, and it just seems excessive to threaten to fine someone for trying to upcycle a motor when we're getting such a small amount for it anyway. I mean, why does there have to be so much ill will, I guess is my
I think the
question.
problem is insurance problems. If someone gets hurt there, trying to pick up a motor or do something, they wind up suing the town. So we're required by risk management not to allow that to happen. It used to, when the dump was open, people would take everything out of it years ago. I mean, they recycle it themselves, but not everybody sues everybody. Risk management won't allow us to do that anymore. Maybe they could be more polite about it, but just can't do that.
Any other
Thank
questions?
you. Thank you for your answer. I appreciate it.
Representative Walk?
This microphone.
Thanks. Jay Wolk, District 5. Anyway, I'll make it very, very quick. I forgot to say, I just wanted to make everybody aware of not only the DPW does work for our snow and other works and paving and everything. I do want to thank you, Joe, and Bill's not here tonight, Hurley, our town engineer, for everything that you're doing to try to correct the problem for the Rooster River. We have a lot of people here in our town that are suffering still from it. We should all be aware of that. I've been to the meetings. I went to I was the only RTM member present at the press conference down by the cemetery where Mike spoke. I have to tell you something that, which is actually true. Our first selectman mentioned it the other day, but Bridgeport's actually looking to you for guidance into fixing this problem. I saw it at the press conference. So I really want to thank you for that. The other thing I just want to say quickly that I guess we're all noticing the project down on Kings Highway is coming to fruition. It looks great. We really needed it. And I hope Bill's going to come to my promise that that light by where Firestone is, we're going to have a turn signal, which he promised we would have. So thank you very much. Thanks, Phil, for the time.
Sure. Any other questions? Seeing none, I think we're all set. Thank you so much. We're going to adjourn until tomorrow at 7 p.m. here.